The great hall stank of desperation and wet wool. Elena stood against the back wall, her hands clutching the rough fabric of her only decent dress, if you could call it decent. The hem had been let out 3 times, the patches at the elbows carefully hidden beneath a shawl that had seen better decades. Around her, the air hummed with nervous energy as women straightened their hair, pinched their cheeks for color, and tried not to look as terrified as they felt. Marriage Day, the town's polite name for what everyone knew it really was. Survival roulette. Elena Cross. Her name cut through the murmur like a blade. Not because it was called with any particular emphasis, but because it was called last. Always last. Martha Henderson, the town clerk's wife, stood at the front with her ledger, her mouth pressed into a thin line of barely concealed satisfaction. She'd never liked Elena. Too tall, too sharp-tongued, too unwilling to bow and scrape to the women who ran Ashford's social hierarchy like it was their own personal kingdom. Elena moved through the crowd. Women stepped aside, their faces a mixture of relief and pity. Relief that it wasn't them. Pity because, well, everyone knew what being last meant. The hall had been packed when the evening started, over 60 women from Ashford and the surrounding settlements. The frontier was brutal to everyone, but it had a special cruelty reserved for women alone. No husband meant no land rights, no protection, no future. The territory's laws were crystal clear. Unclaimed women had 6 months to find a husband or face expulsion from protected settlements. And expulsion was just a polite word for death sentence. Most of the women here tonight were young, 16, 17, fresh-faced girls who giggled nervously and whispered about which men they hoped would choose them. A few were widows, their faces harder, their expectations lower. They knew what they were signing up for. Marriage out here wasn't about love. It was about not dying alone in the dirt. Elena was 24, ancient by frontier standards. She'd been passed over before, 3 times now, once at 20, when she'd still had hope. Again at 22, when hope had started to crack. And last year, when hope had died completely and been replaced by something colder, determination. She reached the front. Martha's eyes gleamed with vindictive pleasure. "One claimant remaining," Martha announced to the room. "Silas Vaughan." The name hit like a physical thing. Several women gasped. 2 of the younger girls actually stepped backward, as if distance could protect them from what that name meant. Elena felt her stomach drop, but she kept her face blank. She'd learned that much, at least. Never let them see you scared. Silas Vaughan. Everyone knew the stories. He lived up in the high country, weeks from any settlement, a place where winter lasted 8 months and the summer was just a brief, brutal intermission. He came down from the mountains maybe once a year, sold furs and bought supplies, and disappeared again into country so remote that most people weren't entirely sure it existed. He'd had wives before. 3 of them, according to rumor. None had come back down. "Where is he?" Elena's voice came out steady. Small victory. Martha's smile sharpened. "Present yourself, please." Elena turned. The crowd parted, and there he was. Silas Vaughan didn't look like the monster from the stories. He looked worse. Real. Tall. Maybe 6'3", 6'4", with shoulders that spoke of decades hauling timber and stone. His hair was dark, shot through with gray, pulled back in a way that made no concession to style. His face was a roadmap of violence, a scar cutting through his left eyebrow, another along his jaw, a third disappearing into his collar. His beard was trimmed close, more practical than decorative. But it was his eyes that caught her, dark, flat, assessing. He looked at her the way someone might examine a horse at auction, checking for weaknesses, calculating value, deciding if the risk was worth the investment. Elena lifted her chin and looked back. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The hall had gone silent. This was theater, she realized. Martha had orchestrated this perfectly. The unwanted woman and the killer mountain man. Entertainment for people whose lives were otherwise consumed with survival's dull grinding. "You Elena Cross?" His voice was rough, like he didn't use it much. "Yes." "You know what you're signing up for?" "I know what the alternative is." Something flickered in his expression. Not quite approval. More like recognition. Like he understood exactly what calculation she'd just made. "Can you ride?" The question caught her off guard. "Some." "Can you shoot?" A rifle. Poorly. Can you work without complaining? Her jaw tightened. I've been working without complaining my whole life. I just haven't been getting paid for it. A few people in the crowd laughed nervously. Silas didn't. But something in his face shifted, the assessment becoming more focused. How much do you weigh? What? You heard me. How much? Elena felt her face heat. Around them, women whispered. This was humiliation by design, but she'd survived worse than embarrassment. Around 130. So 140. 130. Everyone lies light. He stepped closer, close enough that she could smell pine pitch and smoke and something else. The scent of country so wild it didn't have a name. You're thin. That'll be a problem. The cold up there doesn't forgive thin. Then I'll get less thin. You'll try. Most can't. The altitude kills appetite. The work burns everything. Women come up there looking healthy, leave looking like ghosts. His eyes held hers. If they leave at all. There it was. The threat everyone had been waiting for. The confirmation of the rumors. Elena didn't blink. What happened to them? The first one ran off with a trapper who came through. Didn't ask my permission, didn't leave a note. Found her tracks heading east. He said it without emotion, like he was describing weather. The second one got pregnant, had complications. Baby came early. Neither of them made it. The third... He paused. The third one waited until I was gone for supplies and put a rifle in her mouth. The hall erupted in gasps and whispers. Martha looked like she'd just won a prize. This was better than she'd hoped. Elena felt sick. But she also felt something else. Clarity. Whatever he was, Silas Vorn wasn't a liar. He could have softened it, made excuses, blamed the wilderness instead of naming the specific horrors. But he hadn't. You telling me this to scare me off? She asked. I'm telling you this so you know what you're choosing. He crossed his arms. You got family here? No. Friends? She thought of Mary Sutton, who'd married a blacksmith 2 years ago and now crossed the street when she saw Elena coming. Thought of the church women who'd made it clear that charity had limits, especially for women who didn't know their place. Thought of the boarding house owner who'd raised her rent twice this year, forcing Elena to take on laundry work just to keep a room the size of a closet. No, she said. No friends. Silas nodded slowly. Then you got nothing to stay for and nothing to come back to. That makes it simple. Simple? She almost laughed. You call this simple? Yeah. He uncrossed his arms. You marry me. You leave with me tomorrow at dawn. You don't bring anything that can't fit in one pack. No furniture, no sentiment, no second thoughts. The trip takes 3 weeks if the weather holds. Longer if it doesn't. When we get there, you work, you learn, or you die. That's the deal. What do I get in return? The question seemed to surprise him. Maybe no one had asked before. Roof, food, protection. He paused. And I don't hit. Not women. Not ever. That happens once. You got my permission to shoot me in my sleep. It was possibly the strangest marriage proposal in history. Around them, the crowd was losing its mind. Martha's face had gone red with scandalized delight. The younger girls looked horrified. The widows looked thoughtful. Elena studied him, tried to see past the scars and the reputation to whatever was underneath. Was this a man she could trust? Probably not. Was this a man who would keep his word? That, maybe. I want to add terms, she said. His eyebrows rose. Terms. You said you don't hit. I don't either. But if you give me cause, if you lay hands on me in anger, if you force yourself on me, if you do anything that makes me feel like I'm property instead of a person, I walk. Weather or no weather, distance or no distance. I'll take my chances with the wilderness. You wouldn't last 3 days alone. Then I'll die free. But I'll die knowing I chose it. She held his gaze. Those are my terms. For the first time since he'd walked into the hall, something like respect flickered across Silas Vorn's face. It was brief, barely there, but she saw it. Fair enough, he said. Anything else? Yes. She surprised herself with the next words. If I'm coming all that way, if I'm working that hard, if I'm risking my life, I want an equal say in decisions that affect us both. I'm not asking to run things. I'm saying I want a voice. The crowd's murmur rose to a roar. Women didn't make demands. Not here, not ever, and especially not of men like Silas Vaughan. Martha stood. Now see here, this is highly irregular. Shut up, Martha. Silas didn't even look at her. His attention stayed locked on Elena. You don't know what you're asking. Up there, decisions get made fast. No time for debate, no time for consensus. You freeze while you're talking things through. Then teach me to make good decisions fast. What if you can't learn? What if you can't teach? She stepped closer, close enough that she had to tilt her head back to look him in the eye. You're scared I'll be dead weight. I'm scared you'll treat me like a tool instead of a partner. We're both taking risks. I just want mine acknowledged. The hall had gone quiet again. This had stopped being entertainment and become something else. Something dangerous. This was a woman without power trying to negotiate with a man who had all of it. Everyone knew how this went. Everyone knew how it ended. Silas stared at her for what felt like an hour. His jaw worked like he was chewing over something difficult. 1 year, he finally said. What? You give me 1 year. You work, you learn, you follow orders without argument when it's life or death. After that year, if you're still alive, if you've proven you can handle it, we renegotiate. Equal say. Partner decisions. All of it. It wasn't what she'd asked for, but it was more than she'd expected. And if I die before the year's up? She kept her voice light, but the question was serious. Then you died trying something instead of rotting here. He held out his hand. Deal? Elena looked at his hand, scarred knuckles, calluses layered so thick they looked like armor. This was the hand of a man who'd survived things that killed others. It was also the only hand being offered. She reached out and gripped it. Deal. His hand was warm and rough, and when he squeezed, she felt the strength in it. Enough strength to break bones if he wanted. She squeezed back harder than necessary and saw his mouth twitch. Not quite a smile. Martha, Silas called without breaking eye contact with Elena. File the papers. We're done here. But there's the ceremony, the reading of the vows, file the papers. He released Elena's hand. We're leaving at dawn. I want everything legal before we go. And just like that, it was over. The crowd erupted. Martha sputtered protests about propriety and tradition while she simultaneously scribbled in her ledger, already calculating how to spin this story for maximum social currency. The younger girls fled like Elena's bad luck might be contagious. The widows nodded at her, some with pity, some with something that looked almost like approval. Elena stood in the center of it all, her hand still tingling from Silas Vaughan's grip, and wondered what the hell she'd just done. But the boarding house room looked even smaller than usual when Elena returned. One narrow bed, one chair with a broken arm. One window that overlooked the alley where the butcher threw scraps and stray dogs fought over bones. She'd lived here for 4 years. Before that, she'd lived in the church dormitory, the polite name for where they put orphans and unmarried women who had nowhere else to go. She'd scrubbed floors, done laundry, mended clothes, taught basic letters to children whose parents couldn't afford a real teacher. All for room and board, and the kind of grudging tolerance that made it clear she was there on sufferance. Now she had 4 hours to pack everything that mattered into one bag. The brutal truth was, not much mattered. She owned 3 dresses. She'd wear the sturdiest and leave the other 2. They wouldn't survive mountain weather anyway. 2 pairs of boots, both worn through at the soles, but patched and repatched so many times that they were more repair than original leather. Underclothes. A coat that was more holes than wool. A hat. Gloves. She pulled an old canvas rucksack from under the bed and started folding clothes. Her hands moved automatically while her mind raced. What have you done? What have you done? The smart voice in her head, the one that sounded suspiciously like her mother, dead 15 years now, was screaming at her. Silas Vaughan. 3 dead wives. The high country. This was insanity. This was suicide with extra steps. But the other voice, the one that sounded like the woman she'd become, was colder. More practical. What were your options? Stay here? Do what? You're 24. You're running out of time. Another year and you'll be 25. Then 30. And you know exactly what happens to unmarried women over 30 here. She did know. She'd seen it. They became invisible. Not metaphorically, literally. People stopped seeing them, stopped acknowledging them. They worked until they couldn't work anymore, and then they disappeared. Into the church dormitory if they were lucky. Into the woods if they weren't. Elena had watched it happen to Sarah Mackenzie just last year. 43, never married, no family. One day she'd been cleaning the general store. The next day, she was gone. Went to stay with relatives back east, people said, but Elena had seen the town records. There were no relatives. There was no east. There was just gone. That's what she'd been heading toward. That disappearance. That erasure. At least with Silas Vorn, if she died, it would be while doing something. While going somewhere. While trying. She packed her needlework kit, not because she thought she'd need embroidery in the mountains, but because the needles and thread were valuable. A small knife she'd bought off a trader 2 years ago. Her mother's wedding ring, the only thing she had left from before. A book, just one, and she agonized over which. Finally settled on a collection of poetry. If she was going to die, she wanted to die with words that meant something. As she packed, she became aware of voices in the hallway. Low, urgent. She opened her door a crack. Absolutely insane. Did you see him? Did you see those scars? Mary Sutton's voice pitched high with scandalized excitement. 3 wives, Janet. 3. Another woman, Janet Cooper, the baker's daughter. And none of them came back. Well, what did she expect? Standing there like she had any right to make demands? The arrogance? She's desperate. That's different from arrogant. A third voice, older. Widow Jameson. And desperate people do desperate things. She won't last a month. Mary again. Did you see how thin she is? The mountains will eat her alive. If Vorn doesn't do it first. They dissolved into whispers and giggles. Elena closed the door softly, her face burning. She'd known people talked. She just hadn't realized how much they'd been looking forward to her failure. Fine, she thought. Let them watch. Let them wait. I'll survive just to spite them. It was petty. It was small. But pettiness and smallness were sometimes the only fuels available for the fire you needed to keep going. She didn't sleep. How could she? In 6 hours, her entire life was going to change. In 6 hours, she'd leave Ashford forever. This town she hated, yes, but also the only place she'd ever known. The familiar sounds of the street, the smell of the baker's oven starting up at 4 a.m., the way the church bell rang each hour. All of it would be gone. At 4:30, she gave up on sleep and washed using the basin of cold water on her dresser. Changed into her traveling clothes. The sturdy dress, thick stockings, her least damaged boots. Braided her hair tight and wound it into a bun at the base of her skull. No loose hair. Silas had said they'd be traveling through brush and wind. Loose hair was a liability. She was tying off the last of her pack's straps when someone knocked on her door. It's open. Silas Vorn ducked through the doorway, and suddenly her already small room felt microscopic. He'd cleaned up since last night, fresh clothes, hair still damp from washing, but he looked just as dangerous in daylight as he had in the great hall's lamplight. "You're early," she said. "You're ready." He nodded at her pack. "That all?" "That's all." He picked it up, hefted it, frowned. "Light." "I don't have much." "Good." He set it down. "Means you understand what matters. A lot of people, they try to bring things. Photographs, mementos, useless weight." His eyes scanned the room. "This everything? Nothing you're leaving behind that'll haunt you?" She thought about that. Really thought about it. "No," she said. "Nothing." He studied her for a moment. "You scared?" Terrified. The honesty seemed to surprise him. "Most people would lie. Most people are stupid." She picked up her pack. "Can I ask you something?" "Depends on what it is." "Your wives. The 3 before me. Were you honest with them too? Did you tell them what they were walking into?" Silas's expression hardened. "The first one? No, I was younger. Thought I could make it work through force of will. Told her it'd be an adventure. She believed me because I wanted her to." He paused. "I learned from that. The second one, I told her some of it. Not all. She came anyway because she was pregnant and had nowhere else to go. And the third, his jaw tightened. The third one, I told her everything, every warning, every danger. She looked me in the eye and said she could handle it. A week after I left for supplies, she painted the cabin walls with her brain. The brutal imagery hit Elena like a fist. She saw him register her reaction. You wanted honesty, he said. There it is. The mountains don't care about good intentions. They don't care about bravery. They care about whether you're built for it. And most people aren't. And you think I'm not either. I think you're honest about being scared. That's different from most. He picked up her pack. Come on, we've got a lot of ground to cover before dark. The town was silent at dawn. Too early for most people to be awake. Too cold for anyone to want to venture outside unless they had to. Elena walked beside Silas through streets she'd known her whole life, seeing them as if for the first time, or maybe for the last time. There, the bakery where she'd bought bread once a week, carefully counting pennies. There, the church where she'd sat through endless sermons about virtue and humility and knowing your place. There, the general store where she'd worked for 3 months before the owner decided she wasn't a good fit, which was code for talks back too much. She'd hated this town, but leaving it felt like stepping off a cliff. At the edge of town, where the road forked, east toward civilization, north toward mountains, Silas stopped. 2 horses waited, already saddled. One was a massive bay gelding that looked like it could pull a plow through stone. The other was smaller, a gray mare with kind eyes and an air of long-suffering patience. You said you could ride some, Silas said, nodding toward the gray. She's steady, won't bolt, won't fight you, but you'll still need to learn proper mountain riding. Flatland riding's different. Elena approached the mare slowly. The horse huffed and bent her head to be touched. When Elena ran her hand down the warm neck, something in her chest loosened slightly. What's her name? Doesn't have one. All horses have names. Not mine. Silas was already swinging up onto the bay. You name something, you get attached. Attachment's a liability. That's bleak. That's practical. He gathered his reins. You want to name her? Name her. Just don't cry when she breaks a leg in a ravine and I have to shoot her. Elena stared at him. You're unbelievable. No, I'm realistic. There's a difference. He turned the bay north. Mount up. We've got 20 miles before the first camp. She got onto the gray, clumsily, aware of how little actual riding she'd done, and settled into the saddle. The mare shifted but didn't protest. Silas glanced back at her. Last chance to change your mind. You can still go back. Tell Martha there was a mistake. Find someone else at the next lottery. Elena looked back at Ashford, at the church steeple just visible over the roof lines, at the smoke starting to rise from morning fires, at everything she was leaving behind. Then she looked north, at the mountains, at the unknown. No, she said. No going back. Something flickered in Silas's expression. Not approval, not exactly, but something close to it. All right then. He kicked the bay into a walk. Try to keep up. And just like that, Elena Cross rode out of her old life and into something that would either kill her or remake her. She didn't know which. But God help her, she was going to find out. The first day was deceptively easy. The road north was well-maintained, relatively flat, and traveled enough that they passed other people. Traders heading south with furs and timber, a family in a wagon moving toward the northern settlements, a mail carrier on a fast horse who tipped his hat as he passed. Elena rode in silence, adjusting to the mare's gait, to the weight of the pack behind her saddle, to the strange reality that she was actually doing this, actually leaving. The enormity of it kept trying to settle over her like a weight, and she kept pushing it back. No time for existential dread. That was a luxury for people who weren't 3 weeks from potential death. Silas didn't talk. He rode ahead, his attention on the road and the tree line, occasionally glancing back to check on her but never slowing his pace. It became clear quickly that he meant what he'd said. Keep up or get left behind. Around midday, he finally stopped at a creek. The horses drank while Silas pulled dried meat and hard bread from his saddlebag. He handed half to Elena without ceremony. She bit into the bread. It was dense and flavorless and slightly stale. The meat was salty and tough. This is what we're eating for 3 weeks? She asked. This is what we're eating until we hunt something. He chewed slowly, methodically. You ever clean game? No? You're going to learn. He took another bite. Can't be squeamish about blood up there. Everything bleeds. You bleed. The animals bleed. The land itself bleeds in spring when the ice breaks up. You see blood and faint. You're useless. I won't faint. Everyone says that. I've delivered babies. I've washed bodies for burial. I've cleaned infected wounds that... She stopped herself. No need to prove anything yet. I won't faint, he grunted. It might have been approval. It might have been doubt. With Silas, it was hard to tell. They ate in silence. The creek burbled. Birds called in the trees, normal sounds, easy sounds. The last easy sounds she'd hear for a while, she suspected. Why'd you pick me? The question came out before she could stop it. Silas looked at her. What? Last night, in the hall. You could have walked away. Martha would have figured something out, but you stayed. You chose me. Why? He was quiet for a long time. Long enough that she thought he wasn't going to answer. Then, because you were last. That's not an answer. It's the only answer you're getting. He stood, brushing crumbs off his pants. Mount up. We've got another 10 miles before dark. But as she climbed back onto the gray mare, as Silas kicked the bay into a trot and they left the creek behind, Elena thought about that answer. Because you were last. Not because he found her attractive. Not because he thought she'd be useful. Not because of anything she'd done or said. Because she was last. Because no one else wanted her. Because they were both, in their own ways, people who'd run out of other options. It wasn't romantic. It wasn't even particularly kind. But in a strange way, it was honest. And right now, she'd take honest over pretty lies any day. By the time they made camp that night, Elena's legs were screaming. Turns out riding for 12 hours straight when you haven't ridden regularly in years is a special kind of torture. Every muscle from her waist down felt like it had been beaten with a hammer. Silas swung down from the bay like he'd been sitting in a comfortable chair. Elena practically fell off the gray, barely catching herself before her knees buckled. Sore? Silas asked. No. She gritted her teeth. I'm fine. You're a terrible liar. He started unsaddling the horses. First few days are always rough. Gets easier. When? Week or so. A week? Could be worse, could be winter. He pulled the saddle off the bay with easy strength. Winter riding will freeze your thighs to the saddle if you're not careful. Lost a piece of skin that way once, still got the scar. Elena stared at him. That's horrifying. That's the mountains. He nodded at the gray. Unsaddle her. I'll show you how to check her feet and legs. Horse goes lame, you're walking. You want to walk 300 miles? She definitely didn't want to walk 300 miles. Unsaddling the mare was harder than it looked. The saddle was heavier than she expected, the straps confusing. Silas watched her struggle for a minute before stepping in. Here. His hands covered hers, guiding them to the right buckle. This one first, then this. Support the weight before you pull it. Don't let it drop. You'll spook her. His hands were warm through her gloves, close enough that she could feel his breath on the back of her neck. She tried not to tense. This wasn't intimate. This was instruction, survival. Got it? Got it. He stepped back and she pulled the saddle free, staggering slightly under the weight, but keeping her balance. Small victory. Good. Silas took the saddle and set it against a tree. Now her feet. Pick them up one at a time. Check for stones, cracks, heat. Anything off, you tell me. Elena had never checked a horse's feet in her life, but she crouched down, ran her hands down the mare's leg the way she'd seen stable hands do, and lifted. The mare obliged, patient as ever. Nothing, Elena said after checking all four. Good. Now gather wood. Small stuff first, kindling, then bigger pieces, enough to keep a fire going all night. All night? Wolves. He said it casually, like he was mentioning weather. They usually don't bother people, but usually's not always. Fire keeps them honest. Wolves. Right. Because this wasn't terrifying enough already. Elena gathered wood as the sun sank below the tree line. Her back hurt. Her legs hurt. Her hands hurt from gripping the reins all day. But she gathered wood anyway, building a pile that Silas examined with a critical eye. More. he said. She gathered more. More. She gathered more. That'll do. By the time he said that, she'd gathered enough wood to burn for 3 nights. Her arms were shaking. Silas built the fire with quick, efficient movements. Within minutes, flames crackled and heat spread into the growing darkness. He pulled out more dried meat and hard bread. Same meal as lunch. Elena sat on a log and tried not to think about how much her body hurt, or how many more days of this there were, or how this was the easy part. They weren't even in the mountains yet. "You did all right today," Silas said. She looked at him, surprised. It was the closest thing to a compliment he'd offered. "I didn't fall off the horse," she said. "That's a low bar. You'd be surprised how many can't clear it." He poked the fire with a stick. "First wife I had? Fell off 3 times the first day. Cried for 4 hours straight. Second wife made it without falling, but complained so much I considered gagging her. Third wife," he paused. "Third wife was quiet, too quiet. Should have been a warning sign. And me? You're not crying. You're not complaining. You're tired and sore and probably regretting every decision that led you here, but you're still moving." He looked at her across the fire. "That's more than most." Elena wanted to feel proud of that. Instead, she just felt exhausted. "How far did we come today?" she asked. "About 25 miles. "And how far is it total?" 300, give or take, depends on the route. Weather. How fast we can move." 300 miles, 25 miles a day. That was 12 days? No, wait. Math was harder when you were this tired. 12 days if they kept this pace. But Silas had said 3 weeks, which meant the pace was going to slow down. "Why slower later?" she asked. "Mountains." He fed another log to the fire. "Elevation, terrain, weather. Take your pick." He pulled out a bedroll and tossed a second one to her. "Get some sleep. We leave at dawn." The bedroll was thin and smelled like horse and smoke. Elena spread it on the ground near the fire, but not too close. Her body screamed as she lay down. Above her, stars emerged. More stars than she'd ever seen in Ashford, where the buildings and lights blocked out all but the brightest. Out here, the sky was a river of light. "Silas?" Her voice sounded small in the darkness. "What? Do you think I'll make it? All the way?" Silence. For so long, she thought he wasn't going to answer. Then, "Ask me again in a week." It wasn't reassuring, but it was honest. And Elena was learning that with Silas Vaughan, honest was the best she'd get. She closed her eyes and let exhaustion drag her under. Somewhere in the darkness, a wolf howled. Elena slept anyway. The wolf's howl came again just before dawn, closer this time, and Elena jerked awake with her heart hammering against her ribs. The fire had burned down to embers, barely enough light to see by, and for a disorienting moment she couldn't remember where she was or why she was lying on the ground with every muscle in her body screaming. Then it all came back. The marriage, Silas, the journey, the mountains waiting somewhere ahead in the darkness. She sat up, wincing. Moving hurt worse than she'd expected. Her inner thighs felt like raw meat. Her lower back had locked up completely, and her shoulders burned from gripping the reins all day yesterday. This was only day 2. She had weeks of this ahead. Across the dead fire, Silas's bedroll was empty. Panic spiked through her before she caught herself. He wouldn't just leave, would he? She struggled to her feet, biting back a groan, and looked around the clearing. The horses were still there, grazing peacefully in the pre-dawn gray. The packs were still stacked against the tree. And then she saw him, a dark shape at the edge of the clearing, standing motionless, watching the tree line. "You're up," he said without turning around. "Hard to sleep through wolves." That wasn't close. Close sounds different. Hungry sounds different. He finally glanced at her. "How bad?" "How bad what?" "The pain. Don't lie. I can see you moving like you're 80 years old." Elena wanted to snap at him, but what was the point? "Everything hurts." "Good." "Good?" "Means your body's adapting. It'll hurt worse tomorrow, then start getting better." He moved back toward the fire pit and began building it up again with quick, practiced movements. "We've got about an hour before we need to move. Eat something. Stretch if you can. The more you stay loose, the less it'll hurt." She wanted to argue that nothing would make this hurt less, but she was learning that arguing with Silas was like arguing with weather. pointless and exhausting. Instead, she forced herself to move, to walk around the clearing despite her screaming muscles, to bend and stretch in ways that made her want to cry. By the time Silas had coffee boiling, actual coffee, she noted with surprise, some of the stiffness had eased. Not much, but enough that she could move without looking like she'd been trampled by cattle. He handed her a tin cup of coffee so strong it was almost black. She sipped it and immediately understood why he'd made it that way. The bitterness cut through the fog in her head like a knife. "We're changing the route today," Silas said, squatting by the fire. "Weather's coming in from the west. Can you feel it?" Elena tried to feel whatever he was talking about. The air seemed thicker somehow? Or maybe that was her imagination. "I don't know what I'm feeling for," she admitted. "Pressure. Your ears pop slightly. Air gets heavy. Sky looks wrong even if you can't say why." He dumped the coffee grounds into the fire. "You'll learn. For now, trust me when I say we need to make better time today. Storm hits while we're exposed, we're in trouble." "How much better time?" 30 miles instead of 25. 5 more miles didn't sound like much. Until you remembered that 5 miles on horseback, when you were already destroyed, was basically torture. "I can do 30, she said. Silas looked at her for a long moment. "We'll see." They broke camp faster this time. Elena's hands were clumsy on the saddle straps, but she got it done without asking for help. Small victories. That's what she was counting now, small victories to stack up against the overwhelming reality of what she'd gotten herself into. The gray mare seemed to sense her distress and stood extra still while Elena mounted. Or maybe the horse was just well trained. Either way, Elena was grateful. She settled into the saddle with a hiss of pain and gathered the reins. Silas was already moving north, the bay's long stride eating up ground. Elena squeezed the mare's sides and followed. The landscape had changed overnight. Yesterday's relatively flat terrain was giving way to rolling hills covered in pine and aspen. The road, if you could still call it that, had narrowed to barely more than a trail. They passed fewer people. By mid-morning, they'd seen no one at all. "This is still the easy part," Silas called back to her around noon. "Next 3 days, the real climbing starts." Elena didn't answer. She was too busy trying not to fall off the horse. By afternoon, the sky had taken on the quality Silas had mentioned. Wrong, somehow, though she couldn't articulate why. The light was flat. The air felt compressed. Birds had gone quiet. "Storm's close," Silas said. "We need to find shelter." "I thought we were making time." "We were. Now we're staying alive. Different priority." He scanned the tree line, his expression tight. "There's a line shack about 2 miles northeast. Trappers use it. Should still be standing." "Should be?" "Winter's hard on buildings. Sometimes they collapse." He urged the bay into a faster trot. "Keep up." The wind hit 20 minutes later. One moment the air was still, the next it was howling through the trees with enough force to make the horses nervous. The gray mare tossed her head and danced sideways. Elena gripped the reins tighter, her hands already numb. "Easy," she told the horse. "Easy, girl." The mare settled slightly. Elena risked a glance at Silas. He was leaning forward in the saddle, his jaw set, completely focused on the trail ahead. For the first time since she'd met him, he looked concerned. That should have terrified her. Instead, it was almost comforting. At least he was taking this seriously. The rain started as they broke through the tree line into a small clearing. Not rain, actually. Sleet, hard and stinging, driven sideways by the wind. Elena ducked her head and let the mare follow the bay. She couldn't see more than 20 feet ahead. "There!" Silas's voice barely carried over the wind. Elena looked up. Through the gray curtain of sleet, she could just make out a structure, small, low to the ground, listing slightly to one side but still standing. They reached it as the sleet turned to hail. Silas was off the bay before the horse had fully stopped, yanking open the shack's door. It screamed on broken hinges but opened. He grabbed both horses' reins and pulled them inside. Elena slid off the mare and stumbled after them into darkness that smelled like old wood and mouse droppings and decay. Silas slammed the door shut behind her, cutting off the roar of the wind. For a moment, they all just stood there breathing hard. Humans and horses alike. "Everyone intact?" Silas asked. "I think so." Elena's hands were shaking. She couldn't tell if it was from cold or adrenaline or both. "Good." Silas was already moving, checking the horses. running his hands down their legs. "We'll wait it out here. Could be an hour. Could be longer." Elena looked around as her eyes adjusted. The shack was maybe 12 feet square, barely tall enough for Silas to stand upright. There was a stone fire pit in one corner, a shelf with some rusted cans, a broken chair, and a pile of old blankets that mice had clearly been using as a nest. 2 small windows, one of them boarded over. "Cozy," she said. "It's standing. That's all that matters." Silas pulled a blanket from his pack and began rubbing down the bay. "Check the mare. Make sure she didn't pick up any injuries in the wind." Elena did as she was told, running her hands over the gray's legs and body, checking for cuts or heat or swelling. The mare stood patiently, occasionally huffing warm breath into Elena's face. "She's fine," Elena reported. "Good. Now see if you can get that fire pit working. There should be some old wood in here somewhere. Dry it off if you can." Elena found a pile of wood that was only slightly damp and managed to get it arranged in the pit. Getting it lit was another matter. Her hands were too cold. The matches kept going out, and the wood didn't want to catch. "Here." Silas crouched beside her and took the matches. Within 30 seconds, he had flames going. "You're using too much air. Small breaths. Gentle. Fire's like anything else. You force it, it fights back." The fire caught and grew. Heat began to spread through the small space. Elena held her hands toward it, feeling pins and needles as sensation returned to her fingers. Outside, the storm hammered against the walls. Hail hit the roof like bullets. "Is it always like this?" Elena asked. "The weather just changing?" "Up here, yeah. Plains weather gives you warning. Mountain weather does what it wants." Silas settled against the wall, his long legs stretched out. "Could clear up in an hour. Could storm for 3 days, no way to know." 3 days? Elena looked around the shack. "We don't have food for 3 days. We have enough. Won't be comfortable, but we won't starve." He pulled out the dried meat and hard bread. "Ration it anyway, just in case." They ate in silence, the fire crackling, the storm raging outside. The horses shifted and breathed. The shack creaked in the wind. Elena realized this was the longest they'd been stationary since leaving Ashford. No riding, no setting up camp, no immediate task demanding attention, just sitting in a falling-down shack while nature tried to kill them outside. "Can I ask you something?" she said. Silas looked at her. Didn't say yes or no, just looked. She took that as permission. "Why do you live up there?" "In the high country. You could trap anywhere, farm anywhere. Why go so far that it almost kills you?" He was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, "Because it's empty." "That's it? It's empty?" "You ever been somewhere where you can't hear people? Where there's no church bells, no voices, no wagon wheels, no hammers, no nothing?" His voice had taken on a quality she hadn't heard before. Not quite anger, not quite longing. Something in between. "That's what the high country is. Empty, quiet. Just you and the land and whatever agreement you can make with it. Sounds lonely. Sounds like freedom." He poked at the fire with a stick. "Down in the settlements, there's always someone telling you what to do, how to live, what to believe, who to be. Up there, nobody tells you anything. You figure it out or you die. No middle ground." Elena thought about that. Thought about Ashford and the churchwomen and Martha Henderson with her ledger and all the people who'd spent years telling her she wasn't good enough, wasn't humble enough, wasn't quiet enough. "I think I understand," she said. "Do you?" "I think so. Maybe." She pulled her knees up to her chest. "In Ashford, I was invisible. People looked right through me unless they needed something. And when they did see me, it was only to criticize. Too tall, too sharp, too proud. I was never enough of the right things, and always too much of the wrong things. And you think it'll be different up there? I think it'll be honest. If I fail, it won't be because I wasn't feminine enough or quiet enough. It'll be because I wasn't strong enough or smart enough or tough enough. I can work with that. I can't work with being judged for things I can't control." Silas studied her across the fire. "You might be right. Or you might find out that dying honest is still dying. Maybe. But at least I'll have tried something real." She met his gaze. "When your third wife, the one who ended it, did she try? Did she give it everything she had?" His jaw tightened. Don't. I'm not trying to be cruel. I'm trying to understand. There's nothing to understand. She couldn't handle it. Some people can't. End of story. But did you help her? Did you teach her? I taught her everything I knew. His voice had gone hard. I showed her how to keep the fire going, how to preserve meat, how to read the weather. I gave her books. I talked to her. I tried. He stood up abruptly and moved to check on the horses, his back to her. She smiled and nodded and said she was fine, right up until the day she put a bullet through her skull. The bitterness in his voice was raw, real. This wasn't the stoic mountain man. This was someone who'd failed at something that mattered and couldn't forgive himself for it. I'm sorry, Elena said quietly. Don't be sorry. Just don't lie to me. If you're drowning, if you can't breathe, if you're at the end, tell me. Give me a chance to fix it. Don't smile and say you're fine and then paint my walls with your brain. The raw honesty of it hit Elena like a fist. She understood now. Why he was so blunt. Why he refused to soften anything. He'd been lied to by someone he'd tried to help, and it had ended in the worst way possible. I won't lie to you, she said. I promise. Everyone promises. Promises are cheap. Then I'll show you through actions. Isn't that what matters up there? What you do, not what you say? He looked at her over his shoulder. Something in his expression shifted. Not trust. Not yet. But maybe the beginning of belief that trust might be possible. Yeah, he said. That's what matters. The storm raged for 6 hours. By the time it finally blew itself out, evening was settling in, and they'd eaten through most of their rations. Silas went outside to check the trail conditions and came back, shaking his head. Too muddy, too dark. We stay here tonight and leave at first light. Elena had been expecting that. The shack wasn't comfortable, but it was dry and had a fire. Better than being out in the wet. They took turns sleeping, one person always awake to tend the fire and keep watch. Elena took first shift. She sat by the fire listening to Silas's breathing even out into sleep and wondered what she'd gotten herself into. Really gotten into. 3 weeks to the high country, then a full winter trapped there with a man she barely knew, a man who'd lost 3 wives in ways that ranged from abandonment to tragedy to suicide. She should be terrified, should be planning escape routes, but sitting there in the firelight, listening to the horses breathe and the last of the rain drip from the roof, Elena found herself feeling something else entirely. Determination. She'd been dismissed her whole life, overlooked, underestimated. Maybe the high country would kill her, but maybe, just maybe, it would prove everyone wrong. When Silas woke her for the second shift, she'd fallen asleep with that thought still warming her chest. They left the shack at dawn. The world outside looked washed clean, the sky so blue it hurt to look at. The trail was a mess of mud and standing water, but the horses picked their way through carefully. We lost time, Silas said. Need to make it up. You good for another long day? Elena's body screamed no. Her mouth said, yes. Liar. But I appreciate the effort. He urged the bay forward. We push hard today and tomorrow, we'll reach the foothills. Real climbing starts after that. Real climbing. Elena looked ahead at the mountains rising in the distance, their peaks lost in clouds, and wondered what real climbing meant to someone like Silas Vorn. She was about to find out. By midday, Elena understood what he'd meant about making time. They didn't stop. Not for breaks, not for meals. They ate in the saddle, dried meat and hard bread, same as always, and drank from their canteens without dismounting. The horses maintained a steady pace that ate up miles but never quite tipped into exhausting them. How do they do this? Elena called forward. The horses. How do they just keep going? Bred for it. Mountain horses are different, smaller than plains horses but stronger, steadier. They know how to pace themselves. He patted the bay's neck. This one's been with me 8 years. Saved my life twice. How? Once he sensed a bear before I did. Bolted. Got me out of there before I even knew we were in danger. Second time, broke through ice crossing a river. He swam us both to shore even though the current was trying to drag us under. He paused. Lost a good horse that way before I got him. She went through the ice, panicked, drowned us both almost. He doesn't panic. Elena looked at her gray mare with new appreciation. What about this one? She's smart, patient, won't win any races, But she'll get you where you're going. He glanced back. You should name her, by the way. I thought you said naming things was a liability. I said attachment was a liability. Naming's just practical. Easier to call a horse by name than, hey, you, in an emergency. Elena thought about it. The mare was gray, yes, but she was also steady, reliable, the kind of presence that didn't demand attention but was always there when you needed it. Ash, she said. I'll call her Ash. Silas nodded. Good name. Short, clear. Won't get confused with commands. It was the most approval he'd given anything Elena had done. She tried not to let it matter, failed. They reached the foothills late that afternoon. The change was subtle at first, the ground sloping more steeply, the trees growing closer together, the air getting thinner. But within an hour, there was no mistaking it. They were climbing now, really climbing. The trail switchbacked up the hillside, narrow enough that they had to ride single file. On one side, the mountain rose. On the other, it dropped away into a ravine deep enough that Elena couldn't see the bottom. Don't look down, Silas called back. Elena immediately looked down. The drop was dizzying. Her stomach clenched. I said, don't look. You told me not to, which guaranteed I would. You always this contrary? Only when people tell me what to do for my own good. She heard him laugh. An actual laugh, brief and rough, but genuine. We're going to have problems then. Whole mountains about telling you what to do for your own good. The mountain doesn't have opinions about whether I'm too proud or too sharp-tongued. No, it just has opinions about whether you're too slow or too weak. He guided the bay around a boulder. But you're right. At least it's honest. They climbed until dark forced them to stop. Silas found a relatively flat area just off the trail and declared it good enough. No shelter this time, just open air and the mountain rising above them on one side. Elena slid off Ash and immediately regretted it. Her legs buckled. She caught herself on the mare's saddle, breathing hard, waiting for her muscles to remember how to work. That's normal, Silas said. Mountain riding uses different muscles. You'll adapt. When? Week or so. You keep saying that. Because it's true. He was already gathering wood. Fire's more important now. Temperature drops fast at elevation. You'll freeze if you're not careful. Elena helped gather wood, moving stiffly, trying not to think about how many more days of this stretched ahead. When the fire was going and they'd eaten dried meat and hard bread, she was starting to hate both. She sat as close to the flames as she dared and tried to feel her fingers. Cold? Silas asked. I'm fine. You're shivering. I said I'm fine. He pulled a blanket from his pack and tossed it to her. Stubbornness won't keep you warm. She wrapped the blanket around her shoulders. It smelled like horse and smoke and something else, pine maybe, or just mountain air. The shivering eased. Thank you, she said. Don't thank me. Thank the sheep that died for that blanket. You're impossible to be grateful to. Good. Gratitude's another form of debt. I don't want you owing me anything. He fed another log to the fire. Up there, we help each other because that's how we survive. Not because of debts or favors or obligations. You help me because I need it. I help you because you need it. Simple. Nothing about this is simple. It is, actually. You just think it's complicated because you're used to everything having hidden meanings. People saying one thing and meaning another. Games and politics and social bullshit. He looked at her across the fire. The mountain doesn't play games. Neither do I. Say what you mean. Mean what you say. Everything else is noise. Elena thought about Ashford, about Martha Henderson and her fake smiles, about the church women who spoke in honeyed tones while their eyes held daggers, about all the careful navigation required just to survive a conversation without giving offense or losing standing. I think I'm going to like the mountain, she said. Silas's mouth twitched, not quite a smile. Ask me again after you've been snowed in for 3 months. They slept in shifts again. Elena took second watch this time. She sat by the fire, feeding it logs, watching the sparks spiral up into darkness, so complete it felt solid. No moon, no ambient light from town, just stars. So many stars they looked like someone had spilled milk across the sky. She'd never seen anything like it. Down in Ashford, the night sky was something you glanced at between buildings. Pretty enough, but not remarkable. This was different. This was overwhelming. This was seeing how small you were and feeling it in your bones. A sound in the darkness made her freeze. Not the wind, not the horses, something else. Movement in the trees. Her hand went to the rifle Silas had left propped against a log. She didn't pick it up, didn't want to overreact, but she kept her fingers on the stock. The sound came again, closer. "Silas," she said quietly. He was awake instantly, no grogginess, straight from sleep to alert. "What?" "Something in the trees." He listened. The sound came again, a rustle, a crack of breaking branches. "Elk," he said after a moment. "Bull probably from the sound. He won't bother us." "You're sure?" "Yeah." But he didn't go back to sleep. He sat up, reached for his own rifle, and checked it out of habit. Good ears, though. Most people wouldn't have heard that. Well, I spent years sleeping in a room where the walls were thin and the neighbors were loud. You learn to catalog sounds. That'll help up there. I can teach you to shoot and trap and track. But hearing? That's instinct. Either you have it or you don't. It was possibly the first time he'd implied she had something useful. Elena tried not to let that matter. Failed again. The elk moved off. Silence returned. Silas stayed up with her for the rest of her watch, not talking, just present. When it was his turn, Elena lay down by the fire and was asleep within minutes. She dreamed of mountains, of climbing, of reaching the top only to find there was no top, just more mountains stretching forever upward. She woke with Silas shaking her shoulder. Dawn was breaking, pink and gold across peaks that looked close enough to touch, but were still days away. "Up," he said. "We've got a hard climb today." "Harder than yesterday?" "Much." Elena groaned but got up anyway. Her muscles had moved past pain into a kind of distant ache that she was learning to ignore. She saddled Ash, ate a piece of dried meat that tasted like leather, and climbed into the saddle without falling. Small victories. She was still counting them. The climb that day was brutal. The trail got steeper, rockier, narrow enough in places that Elena had to close her eyes and trust Ash to navigate. The air got thinner, her lungs burned, her head ached. Around midday, she realized she could see their breath now. Hers, Silas's, the horses. The temperature had dropped despite the sun. "We're at about 8,000 feet, Silas called back. "You feeling it?" "Feeling what?" "The altitude? Headache? Nausea? Dizziness?" "Yes." "That's normal. Drink water. It'll pass in a day or two as you adjust." 2 days. Everything was 2 days, a week, soon. Elena was starting to hate future tense. They stopped briefly at midday by a stream that cut across the trail. The water was so cold it hurt Elena's teeth to drink, but it was clean and clear and tasted like nothing she'd ever had before. Mineral and stone and ice. "This is snowmelt," Silas said. "Purest water you'll ever drink. Everything from here up is snowmelt, even in summer." Elena knelt by the stream and splashed water on her face. The cold shocked away some of the altitude headache. "How much further to where you live?" she asked. 2 more weeks. Maybe 10 days if we push." 2 more weeks. Elena tried to imagine 2 more weeks of this and couldn't. Her body was already breaking down. How was she supposed to do this for 2 more weeks? "I can see you thinking," Silas said. "Stop it." "Stop what?" "Calculating whether you can make it. Doesn't matter what you calculate. You're here. The only way out is through." He refilled his canteen. "Don't think about 2 weeks. Think about today, then tomorrow, then the day after. 1 day at a time. That's the only way anyone does anything hard." That sounds like something someone wise would say. That's something someone who almost died on this trail once would say. He stood. "Lost my footing, fell about 30 feet, broke 3 ribs and my ankle. Had to crawl 2 miles to a shelter and then wait 4 days until I could walk again. You know what got me through? Not thinking about how I was going to survive. Just thinking about the next hour, then the next, until suddenly I had survived." Elena stared at him. "You crawled 2 miles with broken ribs." 3 broken ribs. Cracked ones you can maybe move through. Broken ones, every breath is like being stabbed. He started back toward the horses. "My point is, you're stronger than you think. Everyone is. They just don't know it until they have to be." They mounted up and kept climbing. The trail got worse. Loose rock, sharp switchbacks, places where one wrong step would send horse and rider tumbling into oblivion. Elena stopped looking at the drops, stopped thinking about the distance left, just focused on Ash's ears in front of her, on the rhythm of hoofbeats, on breathing despite the thin air. 1 day at a time, 1 hour, 1 minute. She could do 1 minute. By the time they made camp that night, Elena was beyond exhausted. She was something else entirely, a state where exhaustion had burned away and left behind a kind of hollow clarity. She moved through the evening routine automatically. Unsaddle Ash, check her feet, gather wood, build fire, eat. The actions had become ritual. "You did good today," Silas said. Elena looked at him. He was settling against a rock, his usual position, rifle across his lap. "You keep saying that," she said, "like you're surprised." "I am surprised. Most people would have quit by now, demanded to turn back or just broken down." He poked at the fire. "You're tougher than you look." "I'm too stubborn to quit. There's worse things to be." He pulled out his knife and a piece of wood and started carving, something he did most nights, she'd noticed. His hands moved with practiced precision, shaving away thin curls that fell into the fire and sparked. "What are you going to do when we get there?" "When we get where?" "The valley? My place. What are you going to do with yourself all winter?" Elena hadn't thought that far ahead. She'd been so focused on surviving the journey that she hadn't considered what came after. "I don't know," she admitted. "What do you do?" "Hunt, trap, maintain the cabin and outbuildings, cut wood for fires, check the stores, make sure we've got enough for the winter." He shaved off another curl of wood. "There's other work too. Leather needs tanning, pelts need processing, tools need maintaining. Always something." "Then I'll help with that." "You ever tanned leather?" "No, but I'm guessing you can teach me." "I can teach you." "Doesn't mean you'll like it. Smells like death and takes forever." "Everything here seems to smell like death and take forever." He laughed, that rare, rough sound. "Fair point." They sat in comfortable silence. The fire crackled. The night pressed in around them, cold and vast. "Silas?" Elena said. "Yeah? Why did you really come down to Ashford? You could have just stayed up there, alone. Why risk getting another wife?" He was quiet for a long time, his knife stilled against the wood. "Because being alone is one thing," he finally said. "Being lonely is another. And I got tired of the second one." He resumed carving. "Humans aren't meant to be isolated. Even mountain men. We pretend we are, but we're not. Eventually the silence gets so loud it drives you crazy." "Is that what happened to your third wife? The silence got too loud?" "Maybe. Or maybe she just wasn't built for it." He looked at her. "That's what I'm trying to figure out with you. Are you built for it, or are you just running from something?" "Both," Elena said honestly. "I'm running from Ashford, from being invisible, from dying slow and unmourned. But I think I'm looking for something. I don't know what yet. Maybe just proof that I can survive something this hard, that I'm more than what those people said I was." Silas nodded slowly. "That's a better answer than most give." "What's yours?" "Your answer, I mean. Why are you really up there?" "Because I killed a man when I was 19. He said it flatly, without emotion. "Wasn't murder. He came at me with a knife over a gambling debt. I defended myself, but his family didn't see it that way. They wanted blood. So I ran so far north that nobody could follow. And when I got there, I found something I liked better than civilization anyway." Elena processed that. A killer. She was married to a killer, except it wasn't murder. It was self-defense. There was a difference. "Are they still looking for you?" she asked. "No, they gave up years ago. I could probably go back if I wanted, but I don't want to." He threw a piece of wood on the fire. "That's the thing about the high country. It gives you permission to be whoever you are without apology. Down there, you have to perform, be acceptable, fit in. Up there, you just have to survive. It's honest in a way nothing else is." Elena understood that more than she could say. They finished their watch shifts and slept under stars so bright they looked artificial. Elena dreamed of mountains again. But this time, when she climbed to where she thought the peak was, she found a valley beyond it, green and sheltered and waiting. She didn't know if it was a promise or a warning. She woke to Silas cursing, low and vicious, and sat up so fast her head spun. Dawn was just breaking, the sky that peculiar shade of gray that came right before sunrise, and Silas was crouched by the fire pit with his hand wrapped in his shirt. What happened? Elena scrambled out of her bedroll. Nothing. Burned myself on the coffee pot like an idiot. He pulled his hand away, and Elena caught a glimpse of blistered skin across his palm before he wrapped it again. I'm fine. Let me see it. I said I'm fine. And I said, let me see it. She moved closer, reaching for his hand. He pulled back instinctively, and something in that reflexive movement told her more than words could. He wasn't used to being helped, wasn't used to anyone caring whether he was hurt. It's just a burn, he said. Then it won't hurt to let me look at it. She held out her hand, waiting. For a moment she thought he'd refuse. Then he sighed and unwrapped his makeshift bandage. The burn ran across his entire palm, angry red with white blisters already forming, bad enough to be painful, bad enough to interfere with writing if it wasn't treated. We need to clean it, Elena said. You have any salve in those packs? Some. In the left saddlebag. She retrieved it, a tin of something that smelled like pine tar and herbs, and brought it back to the fire. Silas had his jaw set in that way she was learning meant he was in more pain than he wanted to admit. This is going to hurt, she warned. Everything hurts. Get on with it. She cleaned the burn with water from her canteen as gently as she could, but he still hissed through his teeth. Then she applied the salve, working it into the damaged skin with careful fingers. His hand was massive in hers, scarred and calloused, the kind of hand that had done brutal work for decades. But right now it was just flesh that hurt. You're good at this, he said after a moment. I told you. I've cleaned wounds before, delivered babies, laid out bodies. She wrapped his hand with clean cloth from their supplies. People got hurt in Ashford, same as anywhere. They just didn't always have doctors. You ever think about being a nurse? A real one? Women can't be real nurses out here. We can help when someone's desperate enough to need us, but we can't be official about it. She tied off the bandage. Same story as everything else. We can do the work as long as we don't want credit for it. Silas flexed his hand experimentally, wincing. That's going to make writing interesting. Can you manage? Have to. We're not stopping because of a burn. He stood, testing his grip. Might need you to take lead today, though, if we hit rough terrain and I can't control the bay properly. It was the first time he'd suggested she take any kind of lead role, and Elena felt something shift in her chest. Not quite pride, she hadn't earned that yet, but maybe the beginning of it. They broke camp slower than usual, Silas moving carefully with his injured hand. Elena saddled both horses without being asked, figuring out the bay's gear through trial and error, while Silas supervised with gritted teeth. Tighter on that cinch, he said. He's holding his breath. Wait for him to exhale, then pull it snug. She did. The bay huffed indignantly but didn't fight her. Good. Now check it again in 10 minutes. Sometimes they relax and the saddle loosens. They mounted up and continued north, climbing higher into country that was starting to look less like earth and more like the bones of the world laid bare. Trees grew twisted here, bent by wind and weighted by snow into shapes that looked wrong. The few patches of grass were tough and sparse. Rock dominated everything, gray and brown and black, sharp enough to cut if you weren't careful. Around midday, the trail narrowed to barely more than a ledge cut into the mountainside. On the left, rock face rose straight up. On the right, a drop that made Elena's stomach clench just looking at it. The trail itself was maybe 4 feet wide. Maybe. Stay calm, Silas called back. The horses know what they're doing. Don't tense up or you'll make them nervous. Easy for him to say. Elena tried to breathe steadily as Ash picked her way along the ledge, each step deliberate, ears swiveling. One wrong move and they'd both go over. She could picture it with horrible clarity, the moment of falling, the impact, the darkness. Stop thinking, Silas said without turning around. I can hear you thinking from here. How? Your breathing changed. You're spiraling. Stop it. His voice was matter of fact. Look at Ash. She's not scared. She's done this before. Trust her. Elena forced herself to look at the mare's ears instead of the drop. Ash was calm, steady. Just walking like this was normal, which it probably was for a mountain horse. They made it across the ledge after what felt like hours, but was probably only 20 minutes. Elena didn't realize she'd been holding her breath until they reached wider ground and she exhaled in a rush. That was the easy one, Silas said. Easy? There's another one about 3 days from here, twice as long, half as wide. He glanced back at her. But you'll be better at it by then. What if I'm not? Then we'll figure something else out. He urged the bay forward. You think I'm trying to kill you? No, I think you're testing me. Fair. I am testing you. Everything up here is a test, but here's the thing. I'm not testing you to watch you fail. I'm testing you to see what you can handle so I know what I'm working with. It was possibly the most honest thing he'd said about what he was doing, and Elena appreciated it even as it terrified her. She was being evaluated, constantly, every moment, not just by Silas, but by the mountain itself. They rode until the sun was low and orange, painting the peaks in shades of gold and red that looked like fire. Silas found a sheltered spot between two boulders and called it good enough. Elena slid off Ash and immediately regretted it. 2 weeks of riding had done something to her body. She was simultaneously tougher and more broken than she'd ever been. Her thighs were raw despite the layers of clothing. Her back ached in new and creative ways. Her hands were blistered from the reins. But she could ride now. Really ride. Could read Ash's moods and movements. Could judge distance and terrain. Could stay in the saddle for 12 hours without falling apart. Small victories. They were adding up. While Elena unsaddled the horses and checked their feet, a routine she could now do without thinking, Silas tried to build a fire one-handed. It wasn't going well. The kindling kept falling apart, and he couldn't strike the matches properly with his bandaged hand. Let me do it, Elena said. I can manage. You're making it worse. Let me do it. He stepped back, jaw tight, and Elena took over. She'd watched him build fires enough times that she had the rhythm down. Small kindling first, arranged in a cone. Slightly larger pieces leaning against it. Space for air to flow. A match cupped against the wind, held to the driest piece until it caught. Then patience. Let it grow. Feed it slowly. The fire caught and spread. Within 5 minutes, they had real flames. Where'd you learn that? Silas asked. From you. I've been watching. She sat back on her heels. You said everything up here is a test. That includes learning when you're not actively teaching. Something that might have been respect flickered across his face. You're observant. That'll help. They ate dinner. Venison this time, from a deer Silas had shot the day before, jerked and tough, but better than dried mystery meat, and sat by the fire as darkness fell. The temperature dropped fast at this elevation. Elena pulled her blanket tight and tried not to think about how much colder it would get. How much further? She asked. A week, maybe less. Silas was rewrapping his hand, awkward with one hand doing all the work. We're making better time than I expected. Because I haven't slowed you down as much as you thought I would? Because you've kept up. There's a difference. He knotted the bandage with his teeth. Most people I've brought up here needed constant stops, constant reassurance. You just keep moving. What else am I going to do? Stop moving and die? Some people pick that option. The way he said it, flat, matter of fact, made Elena wonder if he was talking about his third wife again. The woman who'd picked stopping over continuing. The woman who'd smiled and said she was fine right up until she wasn't. I'm not her, Elena said quietly. Silas looked at her across the fire. What? Your third wife. I'm not her. I don't know what she was going through or why she made that choice, but I'm not going to make it. Elena held his gaze. I told you I wouldn't lie to you, so here's the truth. I'm scared. All the time. I'm in pain. My body's breaking down in new ways every day, but I'm not going to quit. I'm not going to smile and pretend I'm fine when I'm drowning, and I'm sure as hell not going to leave you to find me with my brains on the wall. His expression went through several shifts. Surprise, something that might have been pain, then something harder to read. That's brutal. You're the one who wanted honesty. Yeah, I did. He fed another log to the fire. All right, then here's my honesty. Every day I look at you and see her. Not because you look alike, because you're a woman in a place that breaks women, and I can't stop waiting for you to break. I keep expecting it, dreading it, and I hate that I'm doing it because it's not fair to you. The raw admission hung between them. Elena understood now. This wasn't just about testing her capabilities. This was about his own trauma, his own fear that he'd watch another person he was responsible for fall apart. "I can't promise I won't break," Elena said. "I don't know what's ahead, but I can promise I'll tell you when I'm close. I'll tell you when I'm drowning. You'll have warning. You'll have a chance to help." She paused. "And maybe together we can figure out how to keep me from drowning at all." Silas stared at her for a long moment. Then he nodded slowly. "That's a better promise than nothing." They sat in silence after that, but it was a different kind of silence. Not comfortable exactly, but not hostile either. The silence of two people who'd just said true things and were sitting with the weight of them. Elena took first watch that night. She sat by the fire, feeding it logs, listening to the night sounds she was learning to identify. That was wind. That was a small animal, rabbit or squirrel. That was the horses shifting. That was just the mountain settling, rock expanding, and contracting with temperature. She was starting to understand the language of this place. It was harsh and unforgiving, and it demanded everything from you. But it was also honest in a way Ashford had never been. The mountain didn't care about her past or her reputation or whether she was feminine enough. It only cared about whether she could survive it, and Elena was determined to prove she could. When Silas woke for his watch shift, she settled into her bedroll and stared up at the stars so numerous they looked like snow. She thought about his third wife again, wondered what had pushed her over the edge. Was it the isolation, the silence, the endless work, or something else entirely, some internal darkness that the mountain just happened to be the setting for? Elena would never know. But she could learn from it, could watch for the signs in herself, could remember that asking for help wasn't weakness, it was survival. She fell asleep with that thought and dreamed of fire, of building it, feeding it, keeping it alive through brutal cold. When she woke, she understood the dream wasn't about fire at all. It was about will, about the thing inside you that refuses to go out no matter how hard the world tries to extinguish it. She was going to need that will in the days ahead. The next 3 days were harder than anything Elena had experienced. The trail got steeper, rockier, more treacherous. They crossed 2 more ledges, both longer and narrower than the first. Elena stopped looking at drops, stopped calculating odds of survival, just focused on Ash's steady presence and Silas's broad back ahead of her. His hand was healing slowly. The blisters had burst and scabbed over, but it was clearly still painful. He didn't complain, just adapted, doing everything one-handed or with his left hand when he had to. Elena helped where she could without being asked, and he stopped fighting her on it. They were developing a rhythm, she realized, a way of working together that felt almost natural. He'd start a task, and she'd finish it. She'd struggle with something, and he'd step in without making her feel incompetent. It wasn't partnership yet. She hadn't earned that. But it was the beginning of something. On the 4th day after the burn, they crested a ridge and Silas pulled up short. Elena guided Ash alongside the bay and looked out at what he was seeing. The valley spread below them like something from a dream. High mountain walls on 3 sides, a river cutting through the center, meadows that must be green in summer but were brown now with approaching winter. Smoke rose from a structure barely visible at the far end. "That's it," Silas said. "That's home." Elena stared. After 2.5 weeks of brutal travel, of questioning every decision, of wondering if she'd made the worst mistake of her life, there it was. Real. Solid. Waiting. "How far?" she asked. 4 hours. Maybe 5. He glanced at her. "You want to push through or camp one more night?" Elena looked at the valley, then at Silas, then back at the valley. Every muscle in her body screamed for rest, but something else, something stubborn and determined, said, "Finish it." "Push through," she said. Silas smiled, actually smiled. "All right then, let's go home." They descended into the valley as the sun tracked west. The trail was steep and switchbacked endlessly, but Elena barely noticed. She was too focused on the valley floor getting closer, the cabin taking shape, the reality that she'd actually made it. She'd survived the journey. First test passed. Now came everything else. They reached the cabin as twilight settled in, that blue hour when day hasn't quite surrendered to night. The structure was bigger than Elena expected. Logs fitted tight, a stone chimney, real windows with actual glass. Outbuildings scattered around it. A barn, a smokehouse, Something else she couldn't identify in the dimness. Silas dismounted and stood for a moment, just looking. Elena recognized the expression. This was what coming home looked like when home was something you'd built with your own hands in a place that tried to kill you. It's still standing, he said. That's something. Were you worried it wouldn't be? Always a possibility. Snow can collapse a roof. Bears can get in if they're determined enough. Fire can start from a lightning strike. He led the bay toward the barn. But it's here. We're here. First thing tomorrow, we start preparing for winter. Elena slid off Ash and her legs nearly buckled. 3 weeks of riding had built up muscles she didn't know existed, but they were still screaming. She caught herself and followed Silas into the barn. It was dark inside, smelling of hay and old leather and animals long gone. Silas lit a lantern and the space came alive. Stalls for the horses, tack hanging on walls, supplies stacked in corners. Organized, maintained, the work of someone who understood that chaos could kill you. Get them settled, Silas said. I'll open up the cabin. Elena unsaddled both horses, rubbed them down, checked their feet one last time. Ash nuzzled her shoulder, patient as always, and Elena felt a surge of gratitude for this animal who'd carried her 300 miles without complaint. You did good, she told the mare. We both did. When she finally made it to the cabin, Silas had a fire going in the massive stone fireplace and was lighting lanterns. The interior was sparse but solid. A large main room with the fireplace, a kitchen area, a table and chairs, shelves lined with supplies. A ladder led to a loft space. 2 doors led off this main room to what must be other rooms. That's my room, Silas said, nodding to one door. That's yours. The other door. There's a bed, a chest for your things, not much else. You need something, tell me and I'll build it. Elena opened the door to her room. It was small, maybe 8 by 10, with a narrow bed, a wooden chest, one small window. But it was hers. Private. A space where she could close the door and be alone. After 2.5 weeks of sleeping on the ground next to Silas, it felt like luxury. It's perfect, she said. Silas grunted. It's functional. Perfect something else entirely. He was pulling supplies from a cabinet. You hungry? Starving. Good, because I'm making actual food for the first time in weeks, and I'm not eating alone. He cooked while Elena sank into one of the chairs and tried to process that they were actually here. Actually in the high country. The journey was over. Now came the real work, surviving winter in a place where winter was actively hostile to human life. Silas made venison stew with preserved vegetables and herbs that filled the cabin with smells Elena had almost forgotten existed. Real food. Cooked food. Not dried meat and stale bread. When he set a bowl in front of her, steam rising, chunks of meat and potato and carrot visible, Elena felt something crack in her chest. She picked up the spoon with shaking hands and took a bite. It was the best thing she'd ever tasted. Not because it was gourmet, not because Silas was a great cook, he was adequate at best, but because it was warm and real and represented the end of something brutal and the beginning of something unknown. You all right? Silas asked. Elena realized she was crying, not sobbing, just tears running down her face while she ate stew like her life depended on it. I'm fine, she said. We made it. You made it. That's different. He sat across from her with his own bowl. I've made this trip dozens of times. For you, this was the first. And you did it without falling apart, without quitting, without making me regret bringing you. He paused. That's worth acknowledging. Are you saying you're proud of me? I'm saying you earned your place here. Whatever comes next, you earned the right to try it. He ate a spoonful of stew. That's more than most people can say. They ate in silence after that. Elena finished her bowl, and Silas refilled it without asking. She ate that too, and felt strength returning to her body with each bite. Real food, real warmth, real shelter. She'd made it to the high country. Now came the part where she learned whether she could actually survive it. After dinner, Silas showed her around the cabin properly. The kitchen area had a pump that brought water up from the river. He'd spent 2 years building the system, he said, and it was worth every hour. The shelves were stocked with preserved food, enough to last months if they were careful. The root cellar, accessed through a trap door in the floor, held more vegetables, smoked meat, wheels of hard cheese. "We're not going to starve," Silas said. "But we're not going to feast either. Winter up here lasts 6, 7 months. What we have needs to last." He showed her the outbuildings the next morning. The barn they'd already seen. The smokehouse, empty now, but ready for whatever game they brought down. A workshop filled with tools, saws, axes, hammers, things Elena couldn't name. A storage shed with lumber and supplies. "You built all this yourself?" Elena asked. "Over 10 years, yeah. Little by little. First year I was here, I had a one-room shack that leaked and a lean-to for the horse. Nearly died that winter." He ran his good hand along the barn wall. "But I learned, adapted, built things right the second time." "How old were you when you came here?" 23, young and stupid and angry. He smiled without humor. The angry part kept me alive when the young and stupid part should have killed me. Elena thought about that. Thought about how young 23 was to exile yourself to a place this remote. How much fear or desperation would drive someone to do that? "Do you regret it?" she asked. "Coming here?" "Every winter I regret it. Every spring I remember why I came." He started toward the cabin. "Come on. I want to show you something." He led her past the cabin, up a trail that climbed the valley wall. It was steep and Elena's legs protested, but she pushed through. At the top, Silas stopped and gestured. The entire valley spread below them. River, meadows, cabin and outbuildings looking like toys. Mountains rising on all sides. Peaks already dusted with snow that would deepen and stay until spring. "This is what I wanted you to see," Silas said. "This is what you signed up for. Beautiful, yeah, but also isolated, remote. When winter really hits, we're trapped here. No way in or out until spring. If something goes wrong, if one of us gets seriously hurt, if we run out of food, if the cabin burns down, we're on our own. Nobody's coming to help. Nobody even knows we're here." Elena looked at the valley with new eyes. It wasn't just beautiful. It was a prison, a trap, a place where mistakes could kill you, and there was no backup plan. "You trying to scare me?" she asked. "I'm trying to make sure you understand what you walked into." He turned to face her. "It's not too late. I can take you back down before the snow gets too deep. Find you a place in one of the lower settlements. You wouldn't be the first person to realize this life isn't for them." Elena looked at him, looked at the valley, looked at her hands, blistered, scarred from the journey, but stronger than they'd been 3 weeks ago. "I'm not going back," she said. "You sure about that?" "I've never been sure about anything, but I'm also not going back to a place where I was slowly disappearing." She met his gaze. "I'd rather die trying to build something here than die from being nothing there." Silas studied her for a long moment. Then he nodded. "All right, then tomorrow we start teaching you what you need to know to survive winter." He started back down the trail. "Get some rest tonight. Tomorrow's going to be hard." Elena followed him down, her mind already racing. Tomorrow. The real work began tomorrow, learning how to live in a place that didn't want humans to exist. She was terrified. She was ready. Both could be true at once. That night, alone in her small room with the door closed, Elena finally let herself feel everything she'd been holding back for 3 weeks. The fear, the exhaustion, the grief for the life she'd left behind even though she'd hated it, the uncertainty about what came next. She cried quietly into her pillow, muffling the sound so Silas wouldn't hear. Not because she was ashamed, but because this was hers. This moment of breaking down and building back up. This was private. When the tears stopped, she felt lighter. Emptier, but in a good way. Like she'd purged something that needed purging. Tomorrow she'd start learning how to survive winter in the high country. She'd start proving she belonged here. She'd start building whatever this new life was going to be. But tonight, she could just be Elena Cross. The woman who'd survived 300 miles of mountain trail. The woman who'd said yes when everyone expected her to say no. The woman no one chose, who chose herself instead. She fell asleep with that thought and didn't dream at all. Silas woke her before dawn by pounding on her door hard enough to rattle the hinges. "Up," he called. "Daylight's wasting." Elena dragged herself out of bed, every muscle protesting. The small room was freezing. Her breath came out in visible clouds. She dressed quickly, layering everything she had, and stumbled into the main room where Silas already had coffee brewing and was pulling on his coat. "We're checking the traps today," he said, handing her a tin cup. "I set them before I left for Ashford. Should have something in them by now." "Traps for what?" "Whatever's stupid enough to get caught. Mostly rabbits. Sometimes fox or marten if we're lucky. Their pelts are worth something." He drained his coffee in 3 gulps. "Drink up. We've got a lot of ground to cover." The coffee was scalding and bitter, and exactly what Elena needed. She forced it down, grabbed her coat, and followed Silas out into the pre-dawn cold. The air hit her like a physical thing, sharp, clean, so cold it hurt to breathe. She could see the valley now in the growing light, meadows brown with dead grass, the river a silver ribbon, mountains rising on all sides like walls holding them in, or keeping the world out, depending on how you looked at it. Silas set a brutal pace. They hiked up the valley wall, following what might have been a trail, or might have just been a route Silas knew by heart. Elena's legs burned within the first 10 minutes, but she pushed through. This was the work now. This was what survival looked like. The first trap was empty, the bait taken by something smart enough to avoid the mechanism. Silas reset it with efficient movements, cursing under his breath. "Smart bastards," he muttered. "They learn. Every year they learn." The second trap held a rabbit, frozen solid, its neck broken clean. Silas pulled it out and handed it to Elena. "Hold this." She took it automatically, then realized she was holding a dead rabbit. Its fur was soft under her fingers. Its body was rigid with cold and death. Something in her stomach turned over. "You're not going to faint, are you?" Silas asked. "No." Her voice came out steadier than she felt. "I'm fine." "Good. Because that's dinner. You don't like holding it, that's fine, but you still have to eat it." They checked 15 more traps, found 3 more rabbits, 2 squirrels, and 1 trap that had been torn apart by something large. "Bear," Silas said, examining the damage. "Still awake, which meant winter hadn't fully set in yet." "That's bad?" Elena asked. "That's dangerous. Bear should be denning by now. If it's still active, it's either young and stupid or old and desperate. Either way, it's a problem." He scanned the tree line. "We see signs of it near the cabin. We're tracking it down and killing it." "You can't just let it be?" "Not when it's between me and starvation. That bear will eat our stores if it gets the chance. We'll kill the horses if it's hungry enough. Will come after us if we're in its way." He started back toward the cabin, his stride long and purposeful. "Everything up here is about choices. You or them. Food or hunger. Life or death. There's no middle ground for mercy." By the time they got back to the cabin, the sun was fully up and Elena's legs felt like they were on fire. They'd hiked maybe 5 miles, but 5 miles at elevation on rough terrain was different from 5 miles on flat ground. Silas dumped the game on the work table outside the cabin and looked at her. "You know how to skin a rabbit?" "No." "You're about to learn." He pulled out a knife and selected one of the rabbits. "Watch first. Then you'll do the next one." What followed was possibly the most disturbing education Elena had ever received. Silas worked with quick practiced efficiency, cutting through the rabbit's skin at the back legs, peeling it down and off like removing a coat, gutting it with precise strokes that avoided rupturing anything that would contaminate the meat. "Your turn," he said, handing her the knife. Elena looked at the remaining rabbits. At the knife. At Silas's expectant expression. "I don't think I can do this," she said. "You can. You just don't want to." He wiped his hands on a rag. "That's different. Not wanting to is natural. Can't is giving up before you try." She picked up one of the rabbits. Its fur was matted with blood. She could feel where the neck had broken, the wrongness of the angle. "Where do I start?" Her voice came out small. "Back legs, small cut. Don't go too deep. You just want through the hide." He guided her hand, showing her the angle. "Then you peel. It'll resist. Pull harder." Elena made the cut. The hide split under the knife and she almost dropped it. But she didn't. She peeled, fighting nausea, feeling the skin separate from muscle with sounds that made her want to stop breathing. "Keep going," Silas said. "You're doing fine." She wasn't doing fine. She was butchering an animal and trying not to vomit. But she kept going because stopping meant admitting she couldn't handle it, and she'd promised herself she'd handle whatever came. By the time she finished skinning all 3 remaining rabbits, her hands were shaking and covered in blood, and her stomach was in full revolt. But they were skinned, badly. Her cuts were ragged, and she'd left too much meat on the hides. But they were done. "Not bad for first time," Silas said, examining her work. "You'll get better. By the end of winter, you'll be faster than me." "I don't want to be faster. I want to never do that again." "Then you'll starve." He was gutting the rabbits now, working fast. "This is part of living here. You eat meat, you kill things. You kill things, you process them. There's no butcher shop, no one else doing the dirty work. It's all on you." Elena washed her hands in the basin, scrubbing until the water ran clear. Her hands still felt dirty, would probably feel dirty forever. "How do you get used to it?" she asked. "You don't get used to it. You just stop caring." He looked at her. "Or you care, but you do it anyway because caring doesn't change what needs doing." The rest of the day was spent on other survival tasks. Silas showed her how to check the wood supply. They had enough for maybe 2 months, he said, which meant they needed to cut more before the heavy snow came. Showed her how to inspect the cabin's chinking for gaps that would let in cold. Showed her the root cellar again, this time explaining the inventory system, what they had, what they needed to ration. "We're in decent shape," he said, surveying the stores. "But it's going to be tight, always is. One bad storm, 1 week where we can't hunt, and we're eating half rations." "What happens if we run out completely?" "We don't. That's not an option." His voice had gone flat. "You manage the stores like your life depends on them because it does. You don't waste. You don't overeat. You calculate every meal and make it last." By evening, Elena was exhausted in ways that made the trail journey look easy. Physical exhaustion she could handle. But this was mental too. The constant education, the constant testing, the weight of understanding that every single thing mattered. One mistake and they could die. Not might die. Could die. They ate rabbit stew that night. Elena forced it down, even though all she could think about was the feeling of peeling skin from muscle, the blood under her fingernails, the glassy eyes of the dead animal before Silas removed its head. "You're quiet," Silas said. "I'm tired." "You're bothered. There's a difference." He set down his spoon. "You want to talk about it?" "There's nothing to talk about. I knew what I was signing up for." Knowing and experiencing are different things. He leaned back in his chair. "My first wife, the one who ran off, she couldn't handle the killing, made her sick every time. She'd skip meals rather than eat something she'd watched me butcher. Lost weight, got weak. And then when that trapper came through and offered her a way out, she took it. You think I'm going to run off with a trapper? I think you're realizing that living up here means becoming someone different than who you were. And sometimes people don't like who they have to become." Elena thought about that, about the woman she'd been in Ashford. Invisible, yes, but also softer, less hardened. That woman had never killed anything bigger than a spider, had never held something dead and still warm, had never looked at meat and seen the animal it came from. "I don't know if I like who I'm becoming," she said quietly. "But I don't think I liked who I was either, so maybe becoming someone new isn't the worst thing." Silas studied her across the table. "You're tougher than you think." "Everyone keeps saying that. I don't feel tough. I feel like I'm one bad day from falling apart." "That's what tough is, feeling like you're about to break and not breaking." He stood and started clearing dishes. "Get some rest. Tomorrow we're cutting wood." Elena went to her room and closed the door, sat on the edge of the narrow bed and looked at her hands. They were rougher now than they'd been 3 weeks ago, calloused, scarred, the hands of someone who worked. She'd wanted proof that she was more than Ashford said she was. Well, here it was. She was more. She was becoming more, whether she wanted to or not. The next 2 weeks blurred together in a haze of work. They cut wood from dawn to dusk, hauling logs from the forest, splitting them into manageable pieces, stacking them under cover to keep them dry. Silas taught her how to read the grain, where to place the axe for maximum split, how to swing without wasting energy. Her hands blistered, then calloused. Her shoulders and back screamed, then adapted. She got stronger. Not strong, not like Silas, who could split logs like they were kindling, but stronger than she'd been. They hunted. Silas brought down a deer and made Elena help butcher it. It was worse than the rabbits, so much more blood, so much more meat, the sheer scale of death harder to process. But she did it. Held the legs while he cut, carried organs to the compost pile, helped hang the carcass in the smokehouse. "You're getting better at this," Silas said as they washed up afterward. "I'm getting numb to it." "Same thing up here." They checked and maintained equipment. Silas showed her how to sharpen knives and axes, how to oil leather, how to patch clothing. Everything was about maintenance, he said. Nothing lasted up here without constant care. "Cities, you can be lazy," he explained while showing her how to wax thread for stitching leather. "Something breaks, you buy a new one. Up here, something breaks, you fix it, because there's no buying anything. There's only making do." Elena learned, not because she wanted to, though some of it was interesting in a grim way, but because the alternative was dying. And she was discovering that her survival instinct was stronger than she'd realized, strong enough to overcome disgust, strong enough to push through exhaustion, strong enough to keep her moving even when everything hurt. 3 weeks after arriving in the valley, the first real snow came. Elena woke to silence so complete it was unnerving. No birds, no wind, just nothing. She got up and looked out her small window. The world had disappeared. Everything was white. The meadow, the outbuildings, the mountains. Snow was still falling, thick flakes that looked almost solid. She found Silas already up, standing at the main window with his coffee, watching the storm. "How much?" she asked. 2 feet already, could be 4 before it stops." He didn't look away from the window. "This is it, the real winter. From now until spring, this is what it looks like." Elena stared at the white wall of snow, at the valley that had become a trap, at the mountains that were now impassable. "We're stuck here," she said. "Yeah, for months." He finally looked at her. "You scared?" "Terrified." "Good. Fear keeps you careful. Careful keeps you alive." He moved to the kitchen and started pulling out supplies for breakfast. "We've got work to do. Storm or no storm, animals need feeding, paths need clearing. Life doesn't stop because it's snowing." They spent the day working in conditions Elena wouldn't have believed humans could work in. The cold was vicious, the kind that found every gap in your clothing and burrowed in. The snow was deep enough that each step required real effort. The wind, when it kicked up, threw snow hard enough to sting exposed skin. But the horses needed hay. The water pump needed checking to make sure it hadn't frozen. The cabin's chimney needed clearing of snow to prevent dangerous buildup. The work didn't care about the storm. By evening, Elena was shaking with cold despite all her layers. Silas built up the fire until the main room was almost too warm, and they sat close to it, drying out, feeling sensation return to numb fingers and toes. "That was hell," Elena said. "That was Tuesday." Silas was examining his hand. The burn had healed mostly, but the new skin was still pink and tender. "It'll be worse tomorrow. Storm's not done yet." "How do you know?" "Pressure. Wind direction. The way the animals were acting yesterday." He flexed his hand, testing it. "You learn to read the signs. Sky tells you what's coming if you know how to listen." The storm lasted 3 days. 3 days of digging out paths only to have them fill in overnight. 3 days of brutal cold and wind that howled around the cabin like something alive. 3 days of working in conditions that tested every bit of strength Elena had built up. On the 4th day, the storm broke. The sun came out and the valley was transformed into something from a tale, pristine white, sparkling, so bright it hurt to look at, beautiful and deadly in equal measure. "Now comes the real test," Silas said, surveying the snow-buried world from the cabin door. "Now we find out if we prepared enough, if our stores will last, if the cabin will hold, if we can handle being trapped in close quarters for months." Elena looked at him. At this man she'd married 3 weeks ago and barely knew. This man she'd be spending every day with, in close proximity, with no escape and no privacy except the thin walls between their rooms. "Are we going to kill each other?" she asked. He laughed, that rough, unexpected sound. "Probably come close. Most winters I want to kill myself by February. Having someone else here might actually help, or make it worse. We'll find out." They fell into a routine over the following weeks. Wake before dawn. Feed the fire. Feed themselves. Feed the horses. Dig out paths. Check equipment. Process food. Maintain gear. Eat. Sleep. Repeat. It was monotonous, exhausting. sometimes mind-numbingly boring. And Elena found herself adapting to it in ways that surprised her. She got faster at skinning game, got better at splitting wood, got comfortable with silence, real silence, the kind that lasted hours while she and Silas worked side by side without speaking. She also started to see things she hadn't noticed before. The way Silas favored his left side when he was tired, old injury probably. The way he checked the horizon every morning like he was reading a newspaper. The way he carved wood by the fire most evenings, creating small figures, animals, trees, sometimes human forms that he never kept, just fed to the fire when he was done. "Why do you do that?" she asked one night, watching a perfectly carved rabbit curl and blacken in the flames. "Do what?" "Make things just to burn them." He shrugged. "Keeps my hands busy, and they're not meant to last. Nothing up here lasts. Might as well embrace it." "That's bleak." "That's honest." He started carving again. Down in the settlements, people build monuments, names on buildings, graves with markers, like they think they'll be remembered. Up here, you understand the truth. Nobody's remembering you. Best you can hope for is that you lived well while you had the chance. Elena watched him carve, his scarred hands moving with practiced precision. She was starting to understand him, she realized. Not completely, maybe not ever completely, but enough to see that his harshness wasn't cruelty. It was a form of kindness. He told you the brutal truth because the brutal truth might save your life. "Can you teach me?" she asked. "Teach you what?" "To carve. I need something to do with my hands in the evening besides sit here." He looked surprised, then thoughtful. Then he pulled out a second knife and a piece of soft wood. "Start simple," he said. "Don't try for detail. Just try for the shape of the thing." Elena took the knife and wood and started carving. It was harder than it looked. The blade wanted to skip and catch, the wood wanted to split wrong. But she kept at it, and slowly something that might have been a bird emerged from the block. "Not bad," Silas said when she showed him. "Needs work, but you've got the basic idea." It became their evening routine, sitting by the fire, carving, occasionally talking, but mostly just existing in companionable silence. Elena made birds, trees, fish, all of them rough and imperfect. All of them fed to the fire when she was done. One evening, maybe 6 weeks after the first snow, Silas broke their usual silence with a question that caught her off guard. "You ever think about kids?" Elena's knife slipped and she almost cut herself. "What?" "Kids. Children. You ever think about having them?" Where is this coming from?" He kept carving, not looking at her. "We're married. That's generally what married people do. And winters are long, gets lonely even with two people. I'm not saying we should, I'm saying it's something we should probably discuss." Elena set down her carving and really looked at him. This was the most personal thing he'd said since they'd arrived, the most vulnerable. "Are you asking because you want them?" she asked carefully. "I'm asking because my second wife got pregnant without us planning it, and it killed both her and the baby. I don't want to repeat that." His jaw tightened. "But I also don't want to live like we're strangers who happen to share a cabin. So I'm asking, is that something you'd want, eventually, or are we drawing a line and staying on our sides of it?" Elena thought about it, really thought, about children in a place this remote, about pregnancy without a doctor, about the risk and the responsibility and the sheer terror of bringing a life into somewhere this unforgiving. "I don't know," she said honestly. "I've never let myself think about it because it never seemed possible. In Ashford, no husband meant no children. Out here," she paused, "I think I need to survive a winter before I can think about creating new life." Silas nodded slowly. "That's fair. But when winter's over, we talk about it again. I need to know what we're building toward. If we're partners who might someday be a family, or if we're just two people surviving side by side. What do you want it to be?" He was quiet for a long time. Then, "I want it to be something real, something that matters. I've spent 10 years up here alone and another 3 watching wives leave or die. I'm tired of temporary. I want something permanent, but only if you want it too." The honesty of it hit Elena hard. This wasn't romance. This wasn't pretty words or grand gestures. This was a man saying he was lonely and broken and tired of being both. "I want it to be real too," she said quietly. "I don't know what that looks like yet, but I want to try." "Then we'll try." He went back to carving. After winter, no point making plans when we might not survive to see them through. It was possibly the least romantic agreement to work toward a future together that had ever existed, but it was honest. And up here, honest was worth more than pretty lies. The weeks crawled by. January came and went, marked only by Silas's notation in a ledger he kept. February arrived with blizzards that lasted days. March was somehow worse. A storm would break and give them false hope that winter was ending, then another would hit twice as hard. They ran low on food, not critically low, but low enough that Silas cut their portions and they both went to bed hungry most nights. The horses got thinner. Elena got thinner. Silas's face took on a gaunt quality that made him look older than he was. "This is a bad winter," he said one morning, staring at the latest storm piling snow against the cabin. "Worst I've seen in years. Are we going to make it?" "Yeah, barely. But yeah." He turned from the window. "Might need to slaughter one of the horses, though, if this keeps up." "No." The word came out sharp. "Not Ash. Might not have a choice. Horse meat will keep us alive when everything else is gone. Then we'll find another way. Set more traps. Hunt more. But we're not killing the horses." Silas looked at her for a long moment. "You've gotten attached. She carried me 300 miles. She's earned the right not to be dinner. Sentiment's a liability up here. Then I'll be liable. But I'm not eating Ash." He studied her, and something in his expression shifted. "All right, we'll try other ways first. But if it comes down to us or the horse, it won't. I won't let it. You can't control weather or food supply or toll. I can control how hard I'm willing to work to find alternatives." She moved toward the door. "I'm checking the traps, all of them, every day until this storm breaks." "You'll freeze out there." "Then I'll freeze. But I'm checking them." She did. For the next week, while the storm raged, Elena checked every trap within reach of the cabin. Came back half frozen each time. Found nothing in most of them. Animals were smart enough to stay den during the worst weather. But she kept going, kept trying. On the 8th day, she found a fox in one of the far traps. It was still warm, recently caught. She carried it back to the cabin like a trophy, her hands so cold she couldn't feel them. Silas took one look at her, blue lips shaking so hard she could barely stand, and got her in front of the fire while he processed the fox. The meat wasn't much, but it was something, enough to stretch their stores a few more days. "You're insane," he said, wrapping her in blankets. "You could have died out there." "But I didn't, and we have food." "One fox doesn't solve the problem." "No, but it's one day we don't have to kill a horse. That's enough." Something changed in his face, not quite a smile, not quite pride, something softer that Elena didn't have a name for. "You're stubborn as hell," he said. "You knew that when you married me." "Yeah, I did." He fed the fire another log. "I'm starting to think that's a good thing." The storm finally broke in mid-March. The sun came out and the world thawed slightly, and they both stood outside the cabin, faces turned up to the light like flowers seeking water. "We made it," Elena said. "Most of the way. Still got a month or two before the real thaw." But Silas was smiling, an actual smile, not just the twitch of his mouth. "But yeah, we made it, both of us, together." Elena looked at him and realized something had shifted between them over the winter. They weren't strangers anymore. They weren't even just partners. They were something else, something forged in close quarters and shared struggle and brutal honesty. They were becoming real. Spring came slowly, like it was testing whether the mountains would allow it. First, the snow stopped falling quite so often. Then the sun stayed out for full days instead of hours. The temperature crept up degree by grudging degree until water started dripping from the cabin's eaves, and the sound became a constant background rhythm to their days. Elena stood outside one morning in early April, listening to that drip, and realized she'd survived. Actually survived. A full winter in the high country. The thing people said couldn't be done. "Don't get cocky," Silas said from behind her. He was hauling out furs they needed to air, winter's work, pelts from animals they'd trapped and processed during the endless dark months. Spring's when people die up here. They think the worst is over and they get careless. How do people die in spring? Ice breaking when they cross rivers, avalanches from snowmelt, getting lost because landmarks look different, eating the wrong plants because they're desperate for fresh food. He spread a fox pelt over the railing. Winter kills you slow. Spring kills you fast if you're not paying attention. But despite his warnings, Elena could feel the change in him too. He moved differently, lighter, like a weight had lifted. His face had lost some of that gaunt hunger from February. He smiled more, or at least scowled less. They were both emerging from hibernation, she realized, coming back to life after months of merely surviving. "What do we do first?" she asked, "now that we can actually move around again?" "Check the winter damage. See what needs fixing before next season." He was examining a marten pelt, looking for flaws. "Then we plant a garden, hunt fresh meat, restock everything we used, basically spend the next 6 months preparing to do it all over again." That sounds exhausting. That's life up here. You're either preparing for winter, surviving winter, or recovering from winter. He glanced at her. "Still think it's better than Ashford?" Elena thought about that, about the months just past, the cold, the hunger, the brutal monotony, the night she'd gone to bed so hungry her stomach cramped, the days her hands had cracked and bled from the cold, the times she'd wanted to scream from sheer cabin fever. "Yes," she said, "still better. You're crazier than I thought." "Maybe. Or maybe I just needed to find out what I was capable of." She helped him spread another pelt. "In Ashford, I was barely existing. Here I'm living, even when living is hard." Silas looked at her for a long moment. Then he nodded, like she'd passed some test he hadn't told her about. The next weeks were consumed with work. They cleared paths fully for the first time since November, revealing a landscape transformed by months of snow. Trees had fallen. Part of the barn's roof had collapsed under the weight. The smokehouse door had blown off in some forgotten storm. They fixed it all. Elena learned to patch roofs, replace doors, shore up walls. Her hands, already rough from winter's work, became something else entirely, scarred, strong, capable in ways that would have horrified the churchwomen in Ashford. She liked them better this way. They planted a garden in a plot Silas had cleared years ago. Potatoes, carrots, beans, squash. Seeds he'd saved from last year's harvest. Elena had never gardened before and was terrible at it. Planted things too deep or too shallow. Forgot to water. Overwatered. Panicked when nothing grew immediately. "Plants take time," Silas said, showing her, again, the proper depth for bean seeds. "You can't force them. You just have to give them what they need and wait." "I'm not good at waiting." "I've noticed." He tamped down soil around a potato eye. "But you're going to learn. Because if this garden fails, we're eating a lot less next winter." That put the fear in her. Elena became obsessive about the garden, checking it twice daily, pulling every weed, adjusting the irrigation channels Silas had built. She talked to the plants, quietly, when Silas wasn't around to mock her. Encouraged them to grow, to be strong, to not die and doom her to another winter of hunger. "You know plants can't hear you," Silas said one afternoon, catching her mid-encouragement to a struggling squash plant. "You don't know that." "I'm pretty sure I do." "Then explain why this one started growing better after I told it to stop being lazy." He laughed. That sound she'd learned to treasure because it was so rare. "All right. Talk to them if it makes you feel better. Just don't be surprised when they don't answer back." But the plants did grow. Slowly at first, then with increasing vigor as the weather warmed and the days lengthened. Elena watched green shoots emerge from brown soil with satisfaction that surprised her. She'd made this happen. Her hands, her work, her care. In Ashford, she'd been invisible. Here, everything she did mattered visibly. The garden grew because she tended it. The cabin stayed warm because she gathered wood. They ate because she checked traps and processed game and rationed supplies. She was necessary, essential, real. One evening in late May, she was cooking dinner, venison stew, a luxury now that they could hunt fresh meat, when Silas came in from checking the horses. He stopped in the doorway, watching her move around the kitchen, and she became aware of his attention. "What?" she asked. "Nothing, just, you look comfortable, like you belong here." "Is that surprising?" "Yeah. Most people never get comfortable up here. They're always fighting it, resenting it. You've adapted." Elena stirred the stew, thinking about that. "I think I've changed more than adapted. The person who left Ashford wouldn't recognize me now." "Is that bad?" I don't think so. That person was half alive. This person, she gestured at herself with the wooden spoon. This person is actually living. I'm stronger, harder, less afraid of things that used to terrify me. She paused. I like who I'm becoming, even if she's not particularly nice. Nice is overrated. Capable matters more. Silas moved to help set the table. And you're capable, more than I expected. High praise from Silas Vaughan. Take it while you can. I'm not in the habit of giving compliments. They ate dinner as the sun set, painting the valley in shades of gold and pink. The windows were open for the first time in months, letting in air that smelled like pine and snowmelt and growing things. Outside, birds called to each other. Inside, the fire crackled companionably. This was peace, Elena realized. Not comfort. Life here would never be comfortable. But peace. The kind that came from knowing your place in the world and accepting what that place demanded. Silas, she said. Yeah? Remember when you asked about children back in February? His spoon stopped halfway to his mouth. I remember. I've been thinking about it. All spring, while working the garden, I've been thinking. She set down her own spoon. I think I want to try. Not right away. I want to get through another winter first, make sure I can really handle this. But after that, I think I want to build something permanent. Silas set down his spoon carefully. You're sure? Because once we go down that road, there's no backing out. Children up here, it's serious, dangerous. You could die in childbirth with no doctor for 300 miles. I know, but I could also die crossing the river or falling off a ledge or in 100 other ways. At least with a child, I'd be dying while creating something instead of just surviving. She met his eyes. I want to build a life here, a real life, not just existence, and that means family. He was quiet for a long time, his expression unreadable. Then, all right, we'll try. After next winter, like you said. Give you time to be sure. What about you? Are you sure? I've been sure since I came down to Ashford. I was looking for someone who could be more than just another wife. Someone who could be a partner, a mother. Someone who could help build something that lasts. He reached across the table and took her hand, rough skin against rough skin. I think you're that person, but I needed you to figure it out for yourself. Elena looked at their joined hands and felt something settle in her chest. This wasn't love, not the romantic kind people wrote poems about, but it was something more solid. Trust, respect, partnership forged in brutal conditions. Maybe that was better than romance. Maybe that's what actually lasted. The summer passed in a blur of work. They hunted and preserved meat, grew and harvested the garden, cut and stacked enough wood to fill both sheds, made repairs, built a second storage shed, improved the irrigation system. Every day brought new tasks, new challenges, new things to learn. Elena got better at everything. Her aim with the rifle improved until she could bring down rabbits at 50 yards. Her knife work became efficient, if not quite as fast as Silas's. Her understanding of the land deepened. She could read weather now, predict storms, know when to expect game in certain areas. She was becoming a mountain woman, the kind she'd heard stories about in Ashford, tough, capable, more than a little wild. The kind the town women whispered about with mixture of fear and fascination. The kind she'd always secretly wanted to be. In August, 2 riders came up the valley trail, the first visitors since Elena had arrived almost a year ago. Silas spotted them first and went tense immediately, his hand moving to the rifle he kept by the door. Elena understood. Strangers up here could mean danger, could mean trouble. At minimum, they meant disruption. But as the riders got closer, Silas relaxed slightly. I know them. Trappers from the next valley over. Good men. The trappers, one old, one young, both weathered in that particular way mountain people got weathered, accepted Silas's invitation to rest and water their horses. They stared at Elena with undisguised curiosity. Heard you got married, the older one said. His name was Dutch. Didn't believe it until now. You actually brought someone up here? Wasn't a solo decision, Silas said dryly. Elena, these are Dutch and his son Marcus. They trapped the territory west of here. Ma'am? Marcus said, nodding. He looked young, maybe 20, with hopeful eyes that kept drifting to Elena like she was something miraculous. How are you surviving up here? Dutch asked Elena directly. Most women don't last a season. Most women probably have better options, Elena said. I didn't, so I adapted. Dutch laughed, a rough, surprised sound. I like her. She's got spine. He turned to Silas. You did all right for yourself. Last wife you had damn near burned the cabin down trying to cook breakfast. Different person, different circumstances. Silas's voice had gone tight. He didn't like talking about his previous wives, Elena had learned, especially not his third. They fed the trappers dinner and exchanged news. The lower settlements were growing. New families coming in, talk of building a proper town eventually, maybe even a railroad spur if the territory developed enough. World's changing, Dutch said. Not sure if it's for better or worse, but it's changing. Even up here, we're feeling it. After dinner, while Silas and Dutch talked business, trap territories and pelt prices and trading routes, Marcus pulled Elena aside. Can I ask you something? He said quietly. Depends what it is. How do you do it? Live up here with no other women? No society? Nothing familiar? Elena thought about that, about what she'd given up and what she'd gained. I stopped trying to make this place into something it's not. Stopped wishing it was easier or more civilized. I just accepted it for what it is and learned to survive it. She paused. Turns out I'm good at surviving. You don't miss anything from before? Sometimes. I miss bread that doesn't taste like sawdust. Miss conversations with people who aren't Silas. Miss having more than 2 dresses. She shrugged. But I don't miss being invisible. Don't miss being told I'm worthless. Up here, I know what I'm worth because I see the results of my work every day. Marcus nodded slowly. My ma tried living up here when I was little. Lasted 2 years before she left. Took me with her. Pa's been alone since. Some people aren't built for it. That doesn't make them weak. She said the same thing. Said it wasn't weakness to know your limits. He looked toward where Dutch and Silas were talking. Pa never understood that. Thought she gave up. But she didn't give up. She chose something different. Your father's not wrong either. Up here, giving up and leaving look the same. Elena softened her voice. But your mother knew herself well enough to make that choice before it killed her. That takes a different kind of strength. The trappers left the next morning, heading west toward their own territory. After they'd gone, Elena and Silas stood watching the valley settle back into its usual emptiness. That was strange, Elena said. Having people here. You want more of it? Company? No, maybe sometimes, but not regularly. She turned to him. This valley is ours. Sharing it feels wrong somehow. Silas smiled, a real smile, the kind that reached his eyes. You've gone territorial. That's a good sign. A good sign of what? That you're committed, that this is home now, not just a place you're trying to survive. Home. Elena tested the word mentally. Was this home? The cabin with its thin walls and constant draft, the valley with its brutal weather and isolation, the mountains that tried to kill you 6 months out of the year. Yes, she realized, this was home, more home than Ashford had ever been. Fall came with its usual suddenness. One day the aspen were green, the next they were gold and dropping leaves like snow. The air took on that sharp quality that meant winter was coming, ready or not. They worked frantically to finish preparations. Last harvest from the garden, smaller than Silas wanted, but better than nothing. Final hunting trips to fill the smokehouse. Wood stacking. Equipment maintenance. All the endless tasks that stood between them and starvation. The first snow fell in late October, earlier than last year. Silas cursed and doubled their work pace. They weren't quite ready. Still needed more wood, more meat, more everything. We'll make it, Elena said, hauling another load of split logs. We made it last year with less. Last year was luck. This year we need to be smart. They worked through early snowstorms, through cold that made fingers clumsy, through exhaustion that left them barely able to eat dinner before collapsing into their separate rooms. And then one night in early November, Silas knocked on Elena's door. She opened it, surprised. They'd maintained careful boundaries, separate rooms, separate spaces, privacy respected. Him seeking her out at night was unprecedented. What's wrong? She asked. Nothing's wrong. He stopped, seeming uncertain. Silas was never uncertain. Can we talk? She followed him to the main room where he'd built up the fire. They sat in their usual chairs, but the air felt different, charged somehow. "We've been married over a year," Silas said finally. "We've survived a winter together, built a life together. And we've been," he gestured vaguely, "polite, distant, like roommates who happen to share last names. You're the one who wanted separate rooms. I wanted you to have space, to not feel pressured, but winter's coming again, and I'm tired of being lonely when there's someone right here who might not want to be lonely either." Elena's heart kicked up a notch. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying we agreed to try building something permanent, something real, but we can't do that while maintaining these careful distances." He looked at her directly. "I'm saying I want you in my life, actually in it, not just adjacent to it. This is possibly the most awkward proposal I've ever heard." "It's not a proposal. We're already married. This is just..." He ran a hand through his hair, frustrated. "I'm bad at this. Words, feelings, all of it. But I know what I want, and I'm tired of pretending I don't want it." Elena stood and moved closer to him, close enough to see the firelight reflected in his dark eyes, close enough to smell wood smoke and pine, and something uniquely him. "I'm scared," she said quietly, "of what it means. Of getting pregnant up here with no help. Of building something and having it fall apart like your other marriages. I'm scared too, but I'm more scared of wasting whatever time we have being afraid." She thought about his third wife, about the woman who'd smiled and said she was fine until she wasn't, about how isolation could poison everything if you let it. "If we do this," Elena said, "we have to promise to be honest. Always. Even when it's ugly. Even when it's hard. No pretending everything's fine." "I can do that. And if I get pregnant and I'm terrified, you don't get to tell me it'll be fine. You have to just let me be terrified." "All right. And we figure out how to not drive each other insane during the winter, because I'm not spending 6 months walking on eggshells. Deal. Anything else?" "Yes." She reached out and took his hand, scarred and calloused and strong. "You have to stop seeing your dead wife when you look at me. I'm not her. I'm not going to break like her. And I need you to believe that." Silas pulled her down onto his lap, his arms coming around her with surprising gentleness. "I know you're not her. I've known that for months. You're stronger than she was, stronger than anyone I've brought up here." He pressed his forehead to hers. "You're Elena Cross, the woman no one chose who chose herself instead. The woman who survived 300 miles and the worst winter in a decade. The woman who's been keeping me sane without even trying." Something in Elena's chest cracked open at those words. Not broke, opened, like ice thawing after a long freeze. "I'm still terrified," she whispered. "Good. Me too. We'll be terrified together." She kissed him then, and it wasn't romantic or perfect. It was awkward and urgent and real. Two people who'd spent a year learning each other's capabilities now learning something else entirely. They stumbled to his room and she learned other things that night. That Silas was as careful with her body as he was with everything else important. That he knew how to be gentle despite his rough exterior. That he'd been just as lonely as she had, maybe lonelier. Afterward, lying in his narrow bed with his arm around her, Elena felt something settle that had been unsettled since Ashford, maybe since birth. A sense of rightness. Of being exactly where she was supposed to be, with exactly who she was supposed to be with. "We're going to make this work," she said into the darkness. "Yeah, we are. Even when it's hard. Especially when it's hard." He tightened his arm around her. "That's when it matters most." Winter came hard that year, harder even than the year before. Storms that lasted weeks. Cold that cracked trees with sounds like gunshots. Snow so deep they could barely open the cabin door some mornings. But this winter was different. This winter, Elena wasn't just surviving, she was living. She and Silas worked together like they'd been doing it for decades instead of a year, anticipated each other's needs, divided tasks without discussing them, moved around the small cabin like dancers who'd learned each other's steps. They fought sometimes, vicious arguments about stupid things, cabin fever making them both snappish and mean. But they fought fair, said what they meant, and made up without holding grudges. Elena got pregnant in January. Knew it immediately, the way women sometimes did, something fundamental shifting inside her body. She told Silas over breakfast on a morning when the world outside was white and howling. "I'm pregnant," she said, cutting through his explanation of why they needed to reorganize the root cellar. He stopped mid-sentence. "You're sure?" "Pretty sure." He set down his coffee very carefully. "How do you feel?" "Terrified, excited, sick, all of it at once." She looked at him. "Are you angry?" "Why would I be angry?" "Because this is terrible timing, because winter's not even half over, because I could die and leave you alone again." Silas reached across the table and took both her hands. "You're not going to die. I won't let you. You can't control that. Watch me." His grip was almost painful. "We're doing this different than last time. You're going to tell me every single thing you're feeling, every pain, every fear, every weird symptom, and we're going to be careful, so damn careful. You're not lifting anything heavy. You're eating the best of everything we have. And when the time comes, I'm going to help you through it because I've done this before and I know what can go wrong." That's not reassuring. It's not meant to be. It's meant to be honest. He pulled her out of her chair and into his lap, holding her tight. "I'm scared too, but I want this. Want a family with you. Want to build something that lasts beyond just us." Elena buried her face in his neck and let herself be scared and excited and hopeful all at once. The pregnancy was hard. Morning sickness that lasted all day. Exhaustion that made simple tasks feel impossible. A hunger that their limited stores could barely satisfy. But Silas kept his word. He took over the heavy work, pushed her to rest, gave her the best portions of food, even when she protested. He talked to her about what to expect, what was normal, what was dangerous. He'd helped deliver calves and foals, he said, and while humans were different, the basics were the same. "That's horrifying," Elena said. "That's practical. I'm not letting you die because I was too squeamish to learn." Spring came eventually. The baby grew. Elena's body changed in ways that were fascinating and terrifying. She'd never been around pregnant women much. Ashford kept that sort of thing hidden and mysterious. Now she was living it, feeling this other life moving inside her, and it was both more mundane and more miraculous than she'd expected. "Does it hurt?" Silas asked one evening, his hand on her swollen belly, feeling the baby kick. "Sometimes. Mostly it's just weird. Like my body isn't entirely mine anymore." "Is that bad?" "I don't know yet. Ask me after it's born and I'm not waddling around like a pregnant elk." He laughed and kissed her belly. "You're beautiful." "I'm huge." "You're beautiful," he repeated firmly. "And strong. And building our child. That's beautiful." The baby came in July, during a thunderstorm that shook the valley. Elena's water broke while she was in the garden, and she had maybe 30 seconds of panic before instinct and preparation kicked in. "Silas," she called, and he was there immediately, taking her arm, guiding her inside. Labor was brutal. Hours that felt like days, pain that made the worst of winter look easy. Elena screamed and cursed and gripped Silas's hand hard enough to hurt. He stayed calm, talked her through contractions, told her when to push and when to breathe. "I can't do this," she gasped at one point, exhausted beyond measure. "You can. You are." He wiped her face with a cool cloth. "You've survived everything else. You can survive this." "What if I die?" "You're not going to die. Look at me." He waited until she met his eyes. "You're Elena Vorn, the toughest woman I've ever met. The woman who walked 300 miles and survived winter and builds things from nothing. You're not dying in childbirth. I won't allow it." She wanted to laugh at his arrogance, as if he could control life and death through sheer will, but she also took strength from it, from his absolute belief that she could do this. The baby came as the sun broke through the storm clouds. A girl. Small but healthy, screaming her fury at being born into this harsh world. Silas cut the cord with shaking hands and cleaned the baby while Elena lay back, shaking with exhaustion and relief and overwhelming emotion. She'd done it. She was alive. They both were. "She's perfect," Silas said, his voice rough with something Elena had never heard from him before. Awe, maybe, or fear, or love. He brought the baby to Elena and placed her in her arms. She was tiny, red-faced, furious, beautiful. "What do we name her?" Elena asked. "I don't know. I'm terrible at names." Elena looked at her daughter, This small, fierce thing she'd created in the hardest place imaginable. A girl who'd been born in thunder, delivered by a father who'd killed a man, and a mother who'd been unwanted. Winter, she said. We'll call her Winter, because she was conceived in winter, born after winter, and she'll need to be tough as winter to survive here. Silas looked at his daughter for a long moment. Then he smiled, that rare, genuine smile. Winter Vorn. I like it. It's strong. She'll need to be strong. This place demands it. She will be. With you as her mother, she'll be unstoppable. The first months with Winter were the hardest thing Elena had ever done. Harder than the trail. Harder than her first winter. A baby demanded everything, constant feeding, constant care, constant attention. And they were doing it without help, without family, without any of the support new parents usually had. Elena had never been so exhausted, never felt so overwhelmed. There were nights she cried from sheer frustration, days she wanted to scream. But there were also moments of pure joy. Winter's first smile, her first laugh, the way she looked at Elena like she was the center of the universe. You're doing great, Silas said one evening, finding Elena nursing Winter while tears streamed down her face. I'm a mess. You're a mess who's keeping our child alive and healthy. That's what matters. He sat beside her and put his arm around them both. You don't have to be perfect. You just have to keep going. I'm so tired. I know, but you're doing it. Every day you're doing it. He kissed her temple. That makes you the strongest person I know. They developed a rhythm eventually. Silas took Winter for hours each day, so Elena could sleep or work or just exist without a baby attached to her. Elena learned to nurse while doing other tasks, to sleep in snatches, to function on far less rest than she'd thought humanly possible. And Winter grew, strong and healthy, curious about everything, fearless in the way only children raised in secure homes could be fearless. She crawled, then walked, then ran. Learned to talk early, her first words, Mama and Papa and No, which she used liberally. By her second birthday, Winter was helping with small tasks, gathering eggs from the chickens Silas had acquired from a trader, pulling weeds in the garden, feeding Ash carrots. She was a mountain child, comfortable in the wilderness in a way Elena was still learning to be. She's going to be something special, Silas said one evening, watching Winter try to stack firewood into elaborate towers. She already is special. I mean, she's going to change things. Kids like her, born up here, raised up here, they're the future of the high country. They'll be tougher than us because they never knew anything else. Elena watched her daughter and felt fierce pride mixed with fierce protectiveness. Winter would grow up strong, would grow up capable, would grow up knowing her worth because her parents knew it. She would never be invisible, would never be overlooked, would never wonder if she mattered. The years passed. Winter grew into a fierce, wild child with her mother's stubbornness and her father's practical nature. They had a son 2 years later, Storm, because he'd been born during a blizzard that trapped them for 3 days. Then another daughter, River, named for the waterway that sustained them. The cabin expanded. Silas built an addition for the children, built a schoolroom where Elena taught them reading and writing and mathematics, built a larger barn for the growing herd of goats and chickens and the 2 new horses. The valley became truly theirs, not just survived but inhabited, cultivated, loved. They planted orchards, expanded the garden until it produced more than they could eat, built a second smokehouse and a cheese room. Other families started moving into the high valleys. Trappers who'd been solitary for years brought up wives and children. A small community formed, not a town, nothing so formal, but a loose network of homesteads scattered across the mountains. People who'd chosen isolation, but not loneliness. They gathered sometimes, trading goods and news and help. Elena found herself becoming a person others looked to, for medical help, for advice, for the simple reassurance that life up here was possible. She taught other women how to preserve food, how to treat injuries, how to survive winters that tried to break them. You've become a leader, Silas said one evening after 3 families had visited seeking advice about their stores. I've become useful. There's a difference. No. You've become what this place needed. Someone who proves it's possible. Someone who shows other women they can survive here. He pulled her close. You're changing the high country, making it less of a death sentence for women. Elena thought about that. about all the women who'd tried and failed to live in places like this, about Silas's previous wives and Dutch's departed wife and countless others who'd been broken by the isolation and hardship. She'd survived because she'd been broken before she arrived, had nothing left to lose and everything to prove. That desperation had forged her into something hard enough to withstand the mountains. "I don't want Winter to have to be broken first," Elena said quietly. "I want her to grow up strong instead of having to become strong." "Then we raise her right, teach her everything we know, give her the tools to survive without having to suffer for them first." They did their best, raised their children with honest love and brutal honesty about what the land demanded, taught them to work hard, to be resourceful, to help each other, taught them that family was forged, not given, that survival was a choice you made every day. The children grew. Winter became a skilled hunter at 12. Storm learned carpentry and metalwork. River developed her mother's gift for healing and her father's way with animals. They were mountain children, tough, capable, fiercely independent, but bound to each other by the shared understanding that up here, family was everything. Elena was 43 when she realized they'd done it, actually built something permanent. The cabin was now a homestead. The homestead was now the heart of a small community. The desperate gamble she'd made 17 years ago in Ashford's Great Hall had become a life. She stood on the ridge above the valley one summer evening, looking down at the home she'd built with Silas, at the children playing in the meadow, at the gardens and barns and outbuildings that represented years of work, at the smoke rising from chimneys of other families scattered across the high valleys. "You did it," Silas said, coming up beside her. His hair was more gray now than dark, his face more lined, but his eyes were still sharp, his stance still strong. "We did it," Elena corrected. "No, you did it. I was just surviving up here. You built something worth living for." He put his arm around her. "You turned survival into life. That's all you." Elena leaned into him, comfortable after 17 years of partnership, of marriage, of building something brick by brutal brick. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked. "Coming down to Ashford that night? Taking a chance on someone nobody else wanted?" "Never. Not once." He tightened his arm around her. "You were the best gamble I ever made. I was desperate and out of options. So was I. That's what made us work. We were both at the end of something and ready to begin something else, even if we didn't know what that something was yet." They stood in silence, watching the valley settle into evening, watching their children, those fierce, strong mountain children, chasing each other through grass that would soon need cutting, watching smoke rise and birds circle and the world turn without asking permission. Elena thought about the woman she'd been 17 years ago, invisible, unwanted, standing in Ashford's great hall as the last name called, watching a scarred stranger step from the shadows with an offer that was either salvation or doom. She'd chosen doom, or what everyone else saw as doom. And it had saved her. Not by being easy, not by being kind, but by being real. By demanding everything she had, and then demanding more. By forcing her to discover reserves of strength she hadn't known existed. The high country had broken her down and rebuilt her into something harder, something that lasted. "What are you thinking?" Silas asked. "I'm thinking I'm glad I said yes that night. Even knowing everything it would cost? Especially knowing everything it would cost." She looked at him. "Because now I know what I'm capable of. And I know what we built together. And I know our children will carry it forward." "You think they'll stay? Or will they leave for easier lives?" "I think we raised them to choose for themselves. Some might stay, some might go. But they'll all know they come from strong people who chose hard things because hard things were worth choosing." Silas smiled and kissed her temple. "That's all we can do. Give them the tools and trust them to use them." They walked back down to the cabin as stars emerged. Their children ran to meet them, Winter tall and fierce at 15, Storm solid at 13, River quick and clever at 11. All of them healthy, strong, unbroken. All of them proof that Elena had won the gamble. That night, after the children were in bed and the fire was banked, Elena and Silas sat in their chairs as they had countless nights before. Comfortable silence between them. The kind of silence that came from years of knowing each other completely. "We did good," Silas said. "Yeah." We did. Still think Ashford was worse than this? Elena laughed. Ashford was slow death. This is hard living. I'll take hard living every time. Even when it almost killed you? Especially then, because it didn't kill me. It made me. She reached for his hand. It made us. He squeezed her hand and they sat together, two people who'd been unwanted and overlooked, who'd taken a desperate chance in a frontier hall 17 years ago and turned it into something real, something that lasted, something worth every brutal step it took to get here. Outside, the mountains stood eternal. Inside, the fire burned warm. And between them, Elena and Silas Vorn held the life they'd built against impossible odds. Not because it was easy, but because they'd refused to let it be anything less than real. The woman no one chose had chosen herself, and that had made all the difference.